Hey guys, tonight we slip through the candlelit corridors of a palace so opulent it makes Versailles look like a well-decorated storage unit. Incense curls in the air, the scent of jasmine and amber wrapping around you like a velvet noose. Somewhere, deep in the belly of Topkapi Palace, musicians strum lutes while a concubine counts her blessings and her enemies. You've wandered into the Ottoman harem, a space that's less sexy pillow fort and more Game of Thrones with better upholstery. Gold leaf ceilings glint above a room full of whispers. You can practically hear the silk slippers glide across marble, while behind those veils, a brewing storm. Welcome to the empire of desire, diplomacy, and really bad family drama. And you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Drop your location. And let's make this a global insomnia support group. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit on a brocade cushion beside a fountain murmuring like gossip. It's the early 16th century, and the Ottoman Empire is flexing hard. Borders are ballooning, armies are marching, and at the center of this geopolitical juggernaut is a man with the poetic nickname, Süleiman the Magnificent. His beard is immaculate, his mood, not so much. You see, he's not just emperor of half the known world, he's also a man with concubines to manage, viziers to interrogate, and exactly 0 people who will tell him when he's being ridiculous. The harem, which literally means forbidden, is more than a man cave. It's a fortress within a fortress, filled with women whose beauty is rivaled only by their survival instincts. The official story is that it's a place of luxury, songbirds, and exotic perfumes. The unofficial story, it's a gilded pressure cooker, and someone just turned up the heat. Tonight, you're crouching at the edge of this world, peeking through. Silk and drapes at an elite ecosystem built on desire, fear, and politics as thick as molasses. Sultan Süleiman inherited the harem system from centuries of tradition, but he's about to do something none of his ancestors dared. But hold that, thought we're not there yet. First, let's meet the cast. Picture 100 women, each selected from across Europe, North Africa, and Central Asia, each schooled in everything from the Quran to calligraphy to how to pour tea like you mean it. They're not just pretty faces, they're international assets. Some are here by force, others by calculated ambition, and nearly all of them will never leave. Every girl dreams of catching the Sultan's eye, but the reality, if you do catch it, you'd better pray you know how to keep it, because today's favorite is tomorrow's problem. You drift deeper into the palace, past the privy chambers, and into the imperial hall, where decisions are made and alliances die. The guards don't blink. The walls seem to listen. The velvet cushions are so overstuffed they feel accusatory. You can almost hear the negotiations that happen in coded glances and half sentences. Whispers in Greek, Arabic, Persian, each word, sharpened like a dagger. And above it all looms Süleiman, born in 1494, destined to rule for 46 years. That's a long time to be under pressure. Long enough for even the most magnificent monarch to make deeply personal decisions that become catastrophically public. It's worth noting that under his rule, the Ottomans reached their territorial peak, stretching from Hungary to the Arabian Sea. Historians still argue whether this expansion was genius, luck, or the result of everyone else having a bad century. Either way, he wasn't just building cities and crushing rebellions, he was about to get romantically involved. With a woman so cunning, she makes Cleopatra look like an inner dot in the harem. Time drips like honey, the air is heavy with sandalwood, and the faint anxiety of those who know they're being watched. There are lessons, schedules, rituals. Every movement is performance. The valid sultan, or queen mother, rules the space like a matriarchal CEO. Her word is final. If you think modern office politics are brutal, imagine trying to schedule spa time while also avoiding poison. Eunuchs, especially the chief black eunuch, serve as gatekeepers to the harem, wielding more influence than most generals. These men are both insiders and outsiders, and able to have families of their own. They're terrifyingly loyal and often terrifyingly ambitious. One quirky detail: the Ottoman harem had a complex ranking system that included titles like Iqbal and Kadin. An advancement could depend on everything from musical talent to how strategically you served. Fruit: no one ends up in the Sultan's bed by accident. It's more Hunger Games than honeymoon. And right now, The chamber is humming with rumors of a new arrival, a girl who doesn't flinch, doesn't cry, and might have just told the laundry mistress to shove it. She's not from one of the traditional power families. She wasn't sent as a diplomatic gift. She was taken somewhere across the Black Sea in a small town near what's now western Ukraine. A young girl named Alexandra Lisovska was ripped from her family by Crimean Tatar raiders. She was probably 14, maybe 15. She was sold into slavery and transported like cargo. Most captives vanish into oblivion. This one, she gets renamed Harem, the cheerful one. The irony hits like cold water. She's thrown into the palace system where she learns Turkish, Islam, and the subtle art of not getting murdered by breakfast. You wouldn't bet on her. She's too loud, too clever, too unpredictable. But something about her sticks. Maybe it's the way she sings when she thinks no one's listening. Maybe it's how she laughs during embroidery lessons. Maybe it's that she doesn't seem afraid of anything, not even the Sultan. And then one evening, in a garden dripping with moonlight and melancholy, Sultan Süleiman notices her. Really notices her. The other girls go still. You can feel the atmosphere tighten, like a drum skin about to snap. She curtsies, but not too low. She smiles, but not too wide. She's been watching him, too, and in that moment, something shifts. Not just for her, but for the entire empire. Roxolana, because that's what the Europeans will eventually call her. Meaning the girl from Ruthenia has just stepped onto the stage. The play has begun, and the curtains won't fall for 3 generations. You're still there, tucked behind the gold-embroidered curtain, trying not to breathe too loudly as Roxolana, now officially promoted from decorative wallpaper to imperial lightning bolt, starts rewriting the entire script of Ottoman court. Life, Sultan Süleiman, a man surrounded by diplomats, warriors, poets, and the occasional backstabbing vizier, is suddenly smitten like a college freshman in a bad romance movie. Except this isn't a meet-cute in a coffee shop. It's a high-stakes psychological duel underpinned by empire-wide implications. Roxolana, born a nobody, is now sleeping in the bed meant for imperial bloodlines, and while Süleiman thinks he's in love, the court starts to whisper in the corners. No one quite knows what to make of her. She's not just pretty, she's unsettling. She doesn't cry when the other girls get jealous. She doesn't beg for gifts. She laughs. Too loudly, too freely. She refuses to act like a woman who's just been elevated. She behaves like she's always belonged here. And in a world where concubines are meant to rise quietly and fall silently, that's not just bold, it's dangerous. You trail her as she walks through corridors once forbidden to her, now opening like pages in a diary she plans to rewrite. At night, the Sultan pens love letters that sound more like anxious essays. He calls her his joyful one, my bright moon, and even my throne. No one is quite sure if these are compliments or subtle cries for help. He stops visiting other concubines. He sends her gifts, fabrics from India, spices from Morocco, even a mirror that once belonged to a Persian queen. One scholar argues that his obsession stemmed from a deep psychological fatigue. Süleiman was always more poet than politician, and in Roxolana, he found not just a lover, but a stage partner for his inner opera. Historians still debate whether she truly loved him back or simply realized early that this was her only card worth playing, and she played it like a virtuoso. The other women in the harem begin to feel it first. Meals are colder, laughter is thinner, guards become more attentive, people get reassigned without warning. Roxolana's rise is wrapped in silk, but moves like steel. A girl once mocked for her foreignness is now learning Ottoman court politics. Faster than anyone thought possible, she reads, she listens, and more importantly, she remembers. Everyone who ever snubbed her gets put on her private list, and you get the eerie sense that her memory is long and her forgiveness performative at best. But it's not just a matter of internal politics. What makes Roxolana truly dangerous is that she begins, ever so subtly, to meddle in matters beyond the garden walls. One late night, you find yourself eavesdropping again, this time near the Sultan's private study. Roxolana is speaking, low and calm, about the situation in Hungary. She's never been to Hungary. She's not supposed to care about Hungary, but she asks intelligent questions about troop movement, local allegiances, and which general drinks too much. Süleiman laughs genuinely and answers her, and just like that, she's breached the unbreachable wall. Politics. Most women of the harem are considered too sheltered, too soft, or too expendable to have a say in military or administrative affairs. But Roxolana plays the role of a conversational sparring partner so well, it becomes hard to remember she's technically still a slave, at least on paper. In practice, she's becoming a co-ruler in all but title. One quirky piece of gossip that makes it through the court grapevine is about the clove oil. Roxolana reportedly begins wearing it every day, a sharp, spicy scent that leaves an impression, even years later. Servants would remember the fragrance lingering after she left the room. Historians can't agree whether this was personal preference, subtle branding, or a calculated trigger designed to remind Süleiman of her presence. You lean toward all of the above, because if there's one thing Roxolana excels at, it's turning the softest things perfume, laughter, bedtime stories into weapons. And you can feel the Empire adjusting to her rhythm. Now the court starts buzzing. Whispers reach the janissaries, the elite military corps who pretend not to care about palace drama, but absolutely do. Diplomats from Europe start sending letters back to Venice and Vienna mentioning the red-haired concubine, who seems to control the Sultan's moves. Ambassadors attempt to learn her name. Some even try to bribe eunuchs for a glimpse of her. This isn't just curiosity. This is strategy. Everyone with a stake in the Ottoman Empire realizes something monumental is shifting. The old order where a concubine bore a prince and faded into quiet retirement is being replaced with a new narrative. And Roxolana is writing it in bold ink. One particularly telling moment occurs during a royal audience when Süleiman, breaking centuries of protocol, has Roxolana's apartments moved closer to his own. This may seem minor, but in court architecture, geography is everything. Closer chambers mean more influence, more whispers, more access to private ears. The valid sultan, Süleiman's mother, reportedly disapproves. Her influence begins to wane. Servants get reassigned. A few disappear. Not that unusual in Topcap, but the timing is conspicuous. You wonder, is Roxolana orchestrating this? Is she just lucky? Or is the palace itself rooting for her, bored of old rituals and hungry for chaos? The strangest part, Süleiman changes, slowly, but unmistakably. He starts writing more poetry. He pauses during council meetings, seemingly lost in thought. His letters to foreign rulers become more poetic, sometimes awkwardly so. One ambassador comments that the Sultan seems less severe, more melancholy. It could be age, it could be stress, or maybe he's just in love in a way that frightens him. After all, no one wants to be the emperor who ruined an empire over a girl. But that fear doesn't stop him. In fact, it seems to accelerate his decisions. He begins promoting allies of Roxolana. He listens more closely to her critiques. He even starts grooming her eldest son for future leadership, something utterly unthinkable. For the child of a concubine who wasn't even born within Ottoman territory, historians still argue whether this was love, manipulation, or the collision of two deeply ambitious people who found utility in each other. Maybe it's all three, but one thing's certain. Roxolana is no longer just a whisper in the harem. She is a storm system with coal-line eyes and a memory like a steel trap, and the empire is caught in her weather pattern. You shift slightly. On your cushion, the weight of silk and secrets growing heavier. In the next room, Roxolana laughs again, sharp, musical, and just a little too loud. The kind of laugh that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that ends dynasties. You wake, or maybe you never slept, to the sound of the palace stirring soft, sandals brushing polished stone, eunuchs murmuring coded logistics, and somewhere, a low whistle of wind weaving through the latticework windows of Topcap. Roxolana, as usual, is already several moves ahead of the sunrise. You trail her from the breakfast table, where melon slices form cryptic mosaics, past velvet curtained thresholds that once would have kept her firmly out. Now, she strides through them as if the palace was custom built around her whims. The scent of clove oil still follows her, part signature, part territorial marker. She's more than the Sultan's favorite now. She's his co-conspirator, his confidant, and increasingly his political partner. And while everyone's distracted by her poetry and perfume, she's slowly laying a chessboard over the empire itself. Today's gambit, illness, not real, probably, but well-timed. Oh yes, Roxolana, a master of performance, collapses. Not in front of just anyone, no. She times her swoon for maximum impact. Perhaps a little weakness to stir the Sultan's anxiety, maybe about a melancholy to explain. A few days' silence. The palace, hypersensitive to the rhythms of its stars, reacts instantly. Doctors are summoned. Prayers are whispered, and Süleiman practically breaks his royal neck rushing to her side. Some say she weeps softly, others insist she simply stares at the ceiling, muttering something about fate. Historians still argue whether this illness was psychosomatic, strategic, or just about a genuine exhaustion from navigating palace politics with the delicacy of someone juggling scorpions. But the effect is undeniable. Süleiman is shaken. The idea of losing her sends him into a spiral of reflection, and with it comes a decision no one sees coming. In a move that shocks every layer of court hierarchy, Süleiman publicly renounces intimacy with his other concubines. It's not exactly monogamy. This isn't a suburban rom-com, but an Ottoman context. It's close enough to cause gasps. The harem isn't built for one-woman men. It's a system of dynastic insurance policies, a conveyor belt of beauty and genetics designed to ensure stability. By choosing Roxolana and only Roxolana, Süleiman isn't just breaking precedent. He's rewiring imperial DNA. You sit in the corner of the council chamber, watching advisors' eyebrows rise like synchronized birds. They can't say it out loud, of course, but the message is clear. The Sultan is besotted, maybe even bewitched, and Roxolana, she recovers, slowly, gracefully, triumphantly. It's as if her body knew when to fail and when to return. You get the sense that every sigh, every flutter of the eyes is more scripted than spontaneous. There's an art to appearing vulnerable in an empire built on steel, and she's mastered it. Her recovery cements her position further. Süleiman starts asking for her opinion in public, referring to her as my companion in all matters. Servants know she's now reading reports, not just poems. She spends time with scribes. She learns Arabic legal terms. A concubine who can quote Persian philosophy and discuss the tax harvest in Syria. That's not just impressive, that's terrifying. But not everyone is clapping. In the shadows of the palace places where power can't reach. But paranoia festers. Roxolana's enemies begin to coalesce. Some are other concubines, faded into soft irrelevance. Others are courtiers whose daughters had dreams of proximity to the Sultan. And then there's Mahidevran. Mahidevran, the first favorite, the mother of Prince Mustafa, and the one person who knows exactly how high the stakes are. You trail her, silent as a rumor, through her dimly lit chambers. She doesn't cry. She sharpens hairpins. If Roxolana is the rising moon, Mahidevran is the long eclipse. She was once the uncontested star of Süleiman's heart. The first two give him a son, and that's no small detail. Mustafa isn't just any prince. He's legitimate enough to draw loyalty from generals, governors, even foreign spies. And Mahidevran is smart enough to know that Roxolana doesn't want to share power with her stepson, especially not one that popular. So, the palace becomes a war zone made of glances, gifts, and strategic illnesses. Roxolana tightens her circle. She gives lavish gifts to eunuchs, commissions fountains in her own name, and writes letters to foreign monarchs. Yes, actual political letters. Historians still puzzle over a letter she sent to Sigismund of Poland, where she makes veiled diplomatic suggestions cloaked in flowery language. This wasn't just pillow talk anymore. Roxolana was, in effect, practicing statecraft. She had no official title beyond consort, yet here she was, influencing foreign policy through scented parchment and immaculate handwriting. But even with all this power, she knows one thing clearly: as long as Mustafa lives, her sons plural. Now, because she's had several with Süleiman, remain vulnerable. The Ottoman succession system is a kind of slow-burn horror movie. There is no primogeniture. No oldest son wins. Instead, all sons are technically eligible, and whoever can secure the throne first usually does, often by eliminating his brothers. It's fratricide with royal paperwork. Roxolana isn't just playing for influence. She's playing to ensure her bloodline survives a system designed to devour itself. And Mustafa, he's the glittering threat. So what do you do when the darling of the army, the pride of the people, and the symbol of your own obsolescence is still walking around? You plan. Carefully, you watch. You wait. You paint yourself as the loving mother, the dutiful partner, the elegant ornament of an enlightened court. But behind those gentle smiles is a mind-running probability trees at all hours. You pass by her room late one night. She's awake, writing, not a poem this time, a letter, perhaps, a warning, or maybe instructions. And here's the thing: no one wants to admit, but you feel it in your bones. Roxolana doesn't just want security. She wants permanence. in a palace where women vanish as quickly as perfumes fade. She wants to burn herself into the architecture to ensure that long after her clove oil has dissipated and her laughter has stopped echoing through marble halls, her choices will still shape the empire. And you just sit there, breathing shallow, because this isn't a love story, it's a survival story wherein love's costs. You're beginning to understand the rhythm now, the way Topcat Palace breathes like a living organism, swelling and contracting around its secrets. It doesn't shout, it hums. Doors don't slam, they whisper, and no voice whispers more potently than Roxalana's, now fully ensconced not only in the Sultan's bed, but in his daily briefings, his letters, his very mood. You sense it in the way court officials glance toward her quarters before making decisions, as if her reaction carries the weight of policy. But tonight, you sit beside the ink-stained desk of a tired, love-struck Sultan. He's writing again, not a treaty, not a proclamation, but another one of those sultry, overly floral love letters that modern readers would call cringy if it weren't for the fact that entire regions of the world trembled at the hand holding that pen. My beloved, he writes, you are my joy, my spring, my everything. It's sincere, it's embarrassing, and it's also the beginning of something tectonic. This is where things get weird. You see, Roxalana isn't content with just fluttering around in silk robes, smiling enigmatically from behind lattice windows. She wants more. She wants to shape the empire. And Süleiman, besotted and increasingly relying on her counsel, begins to reshape the rules to accommodate her. The most obvious change. He starts commissioning architecture in her name, not as a gesture of affection, but as a public declaration that she is not just his lover, she's his partner. And that's a problem, because in the Ottoman tradition, royal women are supposed to remain invisible. Their power is meant to be felt, not seen. But Roxalana steps right over that line. Barefoot and smiling, she gets involved in charity projects, yes, but they're calculated masterpieces. Hospitals, soup kitchens, schools, all of them stamped with her signature. Not metaphorically. Her name is literally engraved into the stone, and the public notices. For the first time in living memory, a concubine's name is on the lips of commoners, not in scandal, but in admiration. She's becoming a legend before she's even finished making her moves, and Süleiman, he leans into it. He praises her publicly, quotes her wisdom in council meetings, and even includes her opinions in correspondence with foreign rulers. One letter to the Shah of Persia reportedly includes a suggestion Roxalana had whispered just the night before. Historians still argue whether he was outsourcing policy or simply showcasing her intellect. Either way, the Sultan was no longer a lone monarch. He was a duet, and she was singing the louder part. But not everyone enjoys this new harmony. Süleiman's advisors grow restless. The viziers, especially the Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, begin to sense the shift. Ibrahim, once the Sultan's closest confidant, now finds himself second-guessed, occasionally corrected, and always outmaneuvered by a woman who shouldn't even be in the room. You follow him through a courtyard one evening as he mutters curses. In 3 languages, his frustration is raw, almost pitiable. Once a slave himself, he had risen through the ranks to become the Sultan's right hand, almost a brother. But Roxalana's presence has diluted that intimacy. She's replaced him at the Sultan's side in bed, in strategy, in legacy. And here's where things start burning. Roxalana, feeling the walls closing with resentment, doubles down on her image as Süleiman's equal. She starts writing her own letters to foreign leaders, not just translated memos, but direct missives in elegant prose, often expressing empathy, intellect, and subtle influence. One particularly infamous letter to the Polish king essentially says, "Hi, yes, I'm the woman running your eastern neighbor's household. Let's not go to war. Thanks, it works." The Ottomans delay an offensive, and Roxalana gains another invisible feather in her increasingly heavy crown. But even feathers can crack necks when the pressure mounts. Inside the harem, tensions escalate. Mahidevran, still clinging to what status she has left, watches as Roxalana eclipses her completely. Her son Mustafa, meanwhile, becomes a kind of tragic golden boy, handsome, charismatic, beloved by the army. You pass him training with the Janissaries one morning, his sword slicing the air with practiced elegance. He doesn't know yet, or maybe he does, that his future depends not on his skill, but on his mother's ability to survive Roxalana's silent campaign. And Roxalana, she's not sharpening blades. She's sharpening narratives. She whispers stories to the Sultan, some true, some curated, all persuasive. She raises concerns about Mustafa's ambition, about Mahidevran's influence, about how certain military factions might be growing loyal to the wrong prince. Süleiman listens. How could he not? He trusts her more than any vizier, any son, any prayer. It's not that he believes everything she says, it's that her version of the world comforts him. And the older he gets, the more he clings to comfort. Meanwhile, Roxolana's own son Selim, Bayezid, 600 are being raised not just as princes, but as future contenders in a gladiatorial cage match of dynastic politics. She positions tutors, selects allies, even oversees their education. There's a rumor she personally rewrote the lesson plans to include more poetry and less swordplay. You don't know if it's true, but it fits her strategy. Outthink, not outfight. One scholar notes that Roxolana's understanding of power was distinctly modern. She didn't just play the game, she redesigned the board, and in this redesigned world, love letters become instruments of control. Roxolana and Süleiman exchange hundreds over the years, exquisite, sometimes mawkish, always strategic. They're archived like state documents, preserved in dusty vaults alongside treaties and decrees. In one, Süleiman refers to her as my Sultan, not my Sultana, my Sultan. It's a slippage of titles, perhaps accidental, perhaps revolutionary. Either way, it signals what everyone already fears. The empire has two rulers now, and one of them didn't need a sword to get there. You close your eyes and listen to the scribes in the next room, reading her letters aloud, practicing her diction, learning her cadence. They're not just preserving words, they're absorbing tactics. The love that began as an indulgent diversion has now become the backbone of court governance. Roxolana has entwined herself into the DNA of Ottoman rule, and with every sweet line of verse, she pushes the old order further into the past. This isn't about affection anymore. This is about permanence. She's not just writing to be remembered. She's writing to ensure that she never leaves. Even after she dies, she'll still be speaking. Through letters, through architecture, through the children she is now grooming to inherit the world. And you sit in the silence that follows. Each penned word, the soft scrape of ink on parchment sounding less like romance and more like the quiet ticking of a very patient bomb. You don't need a clock to know the hour has turned. The palace feels colder now, not because of the season, but because something has shifted in the air like the moment before a storm. When the birds vanish and the sky goes still, you sense it every time Mustafa enters a room. Conversations pause, eyes dart sideways. He's tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of military confidence that makes soldiers adore him and advisors nervous. He walks like someone who knows he belongs at the top, and that's precisely the problem, because while his blood may scream destiny, Roxolana's whispers are louder. You watch him at a banquet. He raises a goblet, offers a polite toast, and half the room glances toward Roxolana before sipping. That's power, the kind that doesn't wear a crown, but rearranges the crown's path, and Mustafa knows it. He feels it in the way his father's affection has cooled, in how Roxolana's sons are now front row fixtures at court ceremonies where he once stood alone. Mahidevran, once a queen in all but title, now lurks in the background like a cautionary tale, wrapped in velvet. She's bitter, but she's not stupid. She knows the palace runs on perception, and right now, perception is not on their side. She clings to old alliances, the janissaries, the governors, the military elite who remember Mustafa as the prodigious prince. But it's not enough. Not when Roxolana has the Sultan's ear, the scribe's pens, and the children to fill any power vacuum. And the harem is practically a Roxolana fan club these days. Her sons are paraded through courtyards like golden calves, their every word celebrated, their every misstep excused. Selim, her eldest, isn't exactly a warrior poet. He's more wine than wisdom, but he has one thing no other prince has: his mother's unmatched PR machine. Mustafa, by contrast, walks a tightrope. He's expected to be dignified, yet grateful, assertive, yet deferential, loved, but not to loved. You trail him through the palace gardens one morning, where he practices archery with a detachment that suggests he's less concerned with hitting the target than with preparing for the inevitable. And it is inevitable, because this isn't just a family squabble, it's a succession crisis with embroidered slippers and poisoned figs. The Ottoman system, brilliant and bloodthirsty, doesn't crown heirs. It rewards survivors, All princes are equals until one isn't, and the others, well, the empire has a quiet way of resolving excess. Historians still debate whether Roxolana actively plotted Mustafa's downfall, or simply nudged an already paranoid Süleiman toward the obvious conclusion. But what's undeniable is how conveniently timed the rumors appear. Whispers that Mustafa was meeting frequently with generals, that he referred to himself as the future sultan, that he was accepting tribute from distant provinces, without authorization, nothing concrete, just enough smoke to suggest fire. And in a palace where smoke often means funeral incense, that's all it takes. Süleiman begins pulling back. He sends Mustafa away from Kortan campaign, officially, but unofficially exiled. Letters between them grow formal, cold. Mustafa still performs his duties flawlessly. Perhaps too flawlessly, his victories win him even more affection from the troops, which only deepens the Sultan's suspicion. A popular prince is always one tragedy away from becoming a martyr. Oxelana, of course, says nothing publicly, but her face remains serene even as the empire's second sun begins to flicker. She focuses on her sons, on charitable works, on diplomatic niceties. One day she donates an entire public bath complex to the city, a place for women to gather, gossip, and bathe in marble elegance, all funded by a woman who once washed herself. In fear, the symbolism is rich. Her legacy is being carved into stone while Mustafa's name begins to fade from courtiers' lips. And that, more than anything, tells you what's coming. The tipping point arrives during a military campaign near the Persian front. Süleiman, now older and increasingly isolated from his past confidants, summons Mustafa to his tent under the guise of reconciliation, but you can feel the tension. No wine is poured, no gifts are exchanged. The tent is stripped bare of ceremony. Mustafa enters, dressed as always in perfect composure, and what follows is murky. Historians still argue whether it was a setup from the start, or a genuine test of loyalty gone wrong. What is clear is that Mustafa never leaves that tent. He is strangled silk cord, as tradition dictates. No blood, just the sound of a generation gasping. The empire reels, soldiers mourn, cities whisper, the golden prince is dead, and the official story is vague. Some say treason, some say tragedy. Most know not to ask, but the silence left behind, it screams. And Roxolana, she remains in her chambers, serene. No triumph, no sorrow, just the quiet satisfaction of a mother who has ensured her sons now stand alone on the path to power. There's a story, perhaps apocryphal, that when word reaches her, she lights a candle and keeps it burning all night, not for Mustafa, but for the shadow that has finally lifted from her plans. You feel the weight of it, even now. The harem is quieter, fewer footsteps, less tension, but also less joy. The court knows that something essential has shifted. An old order, rooted in martial merit and royal charisma, has given way to a new model, one where proximity to the Sultan's heart trumps bloodline and battlefield. The Janissaries simmer, Mahidevran disappears into quiet disgrace, and Roxolana's sons, now unchallenged, begin to loom larger in court rituals. The question isn't whether one of them will inherit the throne, it's which one, and how cleanly. And so, the palace returns to its rituals. The fountains flow, the musicians play, the birds chirp as if nothing has happened. But under the marble, history is already rewriting itself. One prince is gone, another waits in the wings, and at the center, smiling softly beneath layers of silk and strategy, sits the woman who made it all possible, not with swords, not with blood, but with a voice as gentle as a lullaby and as sharp as history's favorite blade. Time. You're back in the heart of the palace again, but something feels altered. The corridors are the same. The mosaics still glitter in the late afternoon sun, but there's a stiffness now, a kind of post-tragedy silence that no amount of oud, perfume, or lute music can soften. You move past the gilded latticework and realize that the harem has shifted from a den of rivalry to something colder, more clinical. It's no longer a place of anticipation and fluttering ambitions. It's a machine, and Roxolana, she's no longer the most beautiful thread in top cap. She's the architect. The very rules that once constrained her now kneel at her slippered feet. You pass the room where girls once whispered dreams of catching the Sultan's eye. Now they whisper other things, how to read expressions, how to interpret silences, how to survive. Time doesn't flow, he recoils. Every day is a repetition, not a routine, but a ritual. There are schedules for everything: when the Sultan might visit, when the coffee is served, when letters are read aloud to women who can't leave. But know everything that happens beyond the palace walls. The harem, once imagined by European travelers as a pleasure dome, is far more organized than any modern bureaucracy. Roxolana had a hand in that, too. She introduced stricter hierarchies, streamlined the system of education for the concubines, and increased surveillance, and not just for discipline. It was control. Knowledge was filtered. Moods were cataloged. Behaviors were studied. If someone sneezed twice in a row near Selim, Roxolana would know before nightfall. One might argue she transformed the harem from a romantic fantasy into a political institution. Historians still debate whether this evolution improved the lives of its inhabitants, or simply made them more efficient tools of statecraft. Either way, Roxolana had turned a cage into a control tower, and from that control tower, she could steer not only her household, but also the empire beyond its doors. You listen in on one of her private lectures to her eldest son, Selim. It's less bedtime story and more power seminar. She doesn't coddle, she teaches the finer points of timing, the necessity of mercy when it's profitable, the strategic use of prayer. She tells him that power isn't something you seize. It's something you keep others to disoriented to take dot and sell him. He nods. He always nods. But you notice something else in him. A softness, a love for poetry, like his father, a preference for comfort over conquest. The kind of man who prefers vineyards to battlegrounds. He doesn't have his mother's fire. He doesn't need to, because Roxolana's fire burns for both of them. He just needs to last long enough to inherit what she spent a lifetime curating. You find that strange at first how someone so sharp, so ruthless, could put her legacy into hands so relaxed. But then you realize that's exactly the point. Selim is not a threat, not to her, not to himself, and most importantly, not to his brothers. At least, not yet. Bayezid, Selim's younger brother, is the opposite, proud, confident, with a temperament that echoes the Mustafa who's now a memory. He questions. He pushes. He thinks Selim's path is too easy, too pampered, and Roxolana knows this. You see it in the way she looks at him, admiration tinted with calculation. If Mustafa taught her anything, it's that popularity is a liability, and Bayezid's pride is beginning to draw dangerous eyes. There's a flicker of concern in her otherwise unreadable face whenever his name comes up in court. She doesn't speak ill of him, but she doesn't protect him the same way she does Selim. That tells you everything. Meanwhile, the harem tightens. New women arrive, of course replacements, decorations, possible mothers of the next generation of potential heirs. But none of them rise the way Roxolana did. The system now prevents it. Ironically, by smashing the hierarchy that once enslaved her, she's made sure no one else can repeat her story. You pass through the rooms and hear stories of punishments for unauthorized letters, of concubines confined for months over rumors. It's efficient, it's stable, it's claustrophobic. One French tidbit emerges. Some say Roxolana had hidden passages built beneath the palace to move more freely, to bypass formal routes when politics got messy. Others claim that's just a romantic exaggeration, but you prefer to believe it. It suits her. The world outside, meanwhile, is cracking. The empire still expands, but slowly now. Wars drag on longer, treaties fray faster. The once unstoppable machine of Ottoman conquest is beginning to show the signs of royal micromanagement and administrative bloat. You watch as Süleiman, older now, limps slightly as he descends from his platform during Friday prayers. The Magnificent is becoming the mortified. His eyes are tired. His silences are longer. He's still writing poetry, but now it feels like longing, not celebration. One poem, reportedly written after a dream about Roxolana, ends with a line about drowning in still water. That's not passion. That's exhaustion. Roxolana watches this decline without flinching. She shifts her focus, less on romance, more on the future. She calls more clerics, more advisors. She starts suddenly backing court reforms, especially those that favor Selim's future rule. The legalist in her awakens. It's said she even involved herself in reshaping the wax system, charitable endowments that both earn public goodwill and help secure economic influence for her son's circles. Historians still argue whether this made her a proto-feminist or just an extremely savvy investor. Either way, it worked. The empire became dependent on her infrastructure, both physical and ideological. And through it all, the palace beats on. The eunuchs grow more loyal. The foreign ambassadors start asking more direct questions about her opinions. The Venetian ambassador once reported that Roxolana was more informed and reasonable than any man in the Sultan's court, which is either a compliment or a cry for help. Depending on your angle, you begin to sense that Roxolana's transformation from captive to queenmaker wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a systemic redefinition. She took a private institution meant to suppress and re-engineered it into a public force. That couldn't be ignored. But victory has its own price. You notice her aging, not in the wrinkles or the stiffness in her walk, but in the way she retreats further into private rooms. She writes less. She speaks in fewer words. Her jokes are softer, her laughter rare. There's a melancholy around her now, like a queen who built a throne too heavy to sit on comfortably. And you wonder, has she won, or has she simply outlasted? The girls in the harem don't dare ask. They only mimic her mannerisms, her speech, her caution. The palace may be quieter, but the stakes have never been higher. With Mustafa gone and Süleiman fading, the sons are all that remain, and Roxolana, ever the strategist, begins to prepare for the day she's no longer there to steer them. You sit now in the dim echo of twilight, watching shadows lengthen in the courtyards like secrets too exhausted to hide. The palace doesn't sleep, it just changes gears. What was once the hour of poetry and perfumed strolls has become the hour of planning, plotting, and parchment. And this time, we're not following Roxolana. Tonight, we're following someone quieter, someone whose influence comes not from birth or seduction, but from the singular power of being underestimated. You slip behind a eunuch, yes, a eunuch who moves like silence given legs. His name is Mehmet Aga, and while his official title is Chief Black Eunuch, his unofficial title might as well be Shadow Architect of the Harem. His presence is not glamorous, not poetic, but he has access to everything, every room, every whisper, every sigh. Mehmet Aga is part of a centuries-old system, the elite cadre of castrated men taken from Africa, trained in rigid discipline and given exclusive control over the sacred world of the Sultan's women. If that sounds bizarre to you, congratulations, your modern brain is still functional. But in the Ottoman world, eunuchs like Mehmet are not only gatekeepers, they are living vaults of imperial memory. And Mehmet, he's been watching Roxolana from the start. While others saw a clever concubine, he saw a strategist. He watched her skip steps on the harem ladder, bypass rivals with a glance, and turned Süleiman's affection into a form of legislation. And Mehmet took notes. Always notes. You follow him through back passages, down corridors lined with calligraphy that praises mercy and justice. Irony hangs thick. He doesn't smile much, but when he does, it's the kind of smile that says, I know 10 things you don't, and I've already planned for all of them. You get the sense that even Roxolana respects him, not in a warm, maternal way, but in the way chess players respect the clock. She's smart enough to know that control over the harem doesn't exist without the complicity of the eunuchs, and Mehmet, he's smart enough to use that understanding to carve out a power base for himself, one that outlives concubines, sultans, and even heirs. One quirky historical detail: Mehmet reportedly learned to speak 6 languages, including Latin, and occasionally corrected foreign ambassadors when their Turkish got sloppy. Some say he even ghost wrote letters for Roxolana when she was too busy orchestrating the emotional apocalypse of the century. Historians still argue whether he was her collaborator or her insurance policy. Either way, he wasn't just part of the machinery. He was the oil that kept it from grinding to a halt. You watch him during a meeting in the harem's administrative hall, a place most people don't even know exists. A ledger is presented, tracking food, clothing, births, and something intriguingly labeled special incidents. No one explains what those are. Mehmet doesn't ask. He simply nods and makes two gestures. One servant is reassigned, another vanishes. You're not sure where. That's the thing about power here, it's quiet, procedural, and you don't realize what's changed until it's too late to do anything about it. Roxolana knows this too. Her power is loud in reputation, but silent in operation. She consults Mehmet regularly, but never with others present. She knows that a woman who appears too dependent on a eunuch invites criticism, but a woman who ignores them courts disaster. So she walks a line, one eye always on the door, one hand always on the pulse of the harem's inner rhythms. And Mehmet, he becomes her mirror, Not her ally, not her enemy, just a presence she can neither control nor afford to underestimate. But power has its price. Mehmed, for all his influence, lives a life of permanent exile from anything resembling ordinary human intimacy. You pass his quarters late one night, books piled high, a single oil lamp burning low. He reads, always, chronicles, maps, letters intercepted and translated. He knows more than any vizier, more than any scribe, and yet he has no legacy, no family. His life is entirely tethered to the survival of a system that cannot thank him. But that doesn't mean he's passive. In fact, he's begun making quiet preparations. Some say he's grooming his own successor. Others whisper that he's been hiding messages in shipments to Cairo, maybe laying groundwork for his own post-palace network. Historians still don't agree whether he was building a secret intelligence bureau or just bored of court gossip. Either way, he's not just surviving, he's adapting. Meanwhile, Roxolana's hold is tightening, but it's also fraying. The more she builds, the more she has to defend, and Mehmed sees it. He sees the fatigue behind her painted eyes, the way her orders now come with second drafts, the way she hesitates before approving punishment she once handed out like hand cream. The weight of an empire has settled on her like a shawl she can't remove. And Mehmed, he notes it, he files it, he prepares Daw one evening. You catch a moment, a rare, unscripted moment. Roxolana is alone in the courtyard, staring at a rose bush that's stubbornly refusing to bloom. Mehmed approaches. They don't speak, they just stand there, watching a plant that refuses to obey nature's timing. And in that silence, you realize something profound, that only the people who truly understand what it takes to survive in this palace are a woman who redefined womanhood, and a man who was denied manhood entirely. Neither of them fits the roles assigned. Both of them rewrote their parts, and both of them know that the next act is coming, because the harem may feel eternal. But nothing here lasts, not the perfumes, not the poems, not even the princes. Only the architecture of power remains, and even that is subject to collapse when the foundations start to shift. Mehmed Aga may not leave statues behind, but the carpets are quieter now. Not in volume after all, they never made much noise but in tone. You feel it as you drift through the palace corridors. The whispers are fewer, the glance is sharper. The air inside Topkap is heavier, thick with the residue of a crime that no one will admit happened. Mustafa is dead, yes, but the empire itself hasn't moved on. It's merely adjusted its spine around the loss. And for the soldiers, especially the Sipahi cavalry elite, that adjustment feels more like a betrayal than a policy shift. You catch murmurs in the outer courtyards, in the stables, in the barracks tucked just beyond the harem's golden gates. Whispers that something has curdled in the empire's blood. The Sipahi don't sing anymore. These men elite, proud, and fiercely loyal to the memory of a prince they believed in now ride with tighter jaws and shorter tempers. Süleiman may be their sultan, but Mustafa was their hope, their reflection, their unspoken promise that the old ways still had champions. And now they drink a little more, patrol a little slower, and look to the palace with eyes that no longer sparkle with pride. It's subtle, it's dangerous. You overhear one veteran say, "We fight for ghosts now," and everyone nearby pretends not to hear, even as they all nod. Oxelana feels it, too. Her chambers are more heavily guarded these days, not by request, but by necessity. She's won the war inside the palace, but the ripple outside is less predictable. The janissaries remain silent for now, but the Sipahi are a different beast, less refined, more emotional, and historically inclined toward glorified martyrdom. Some of them had fought alongside Mustafa. A few even remember carrying him on their shoulders as a child. You watch them sparring in the training field one morning. They fight harder now, not for strength, but for distraction. You realize something dangerous is brewing, not open rebellion, but discontent with teeth. Back inside the palace, Süleiman is not himself. His steps are slower, his gaze distracted. The loss of Mustafa, compounded by age and the constant hum of palace paranoia, has hollowed him out in places no doctor can examine. He still writes poetry, but it lacks the fire of his earlier years. Now it's mostly elegies, regrets, cryptic metaphors about ships lost at sea and stars that refuse to shine. Roxolana reads them and says nothing. What could she say? This was the cost, a calculated subtraction to protect her additions. And the people know it, though. They don't say it in public, of course, not unless they enjoy disappearing, but the coffee houses in Istanbul buzz late into the night with murmurs about the red-haired woman, about the son who was, about the sons who are. Historians still debate whether this growing unrest had any real teeth, but in the palace, perception matters more than statistics. Roxolana increases her charitable spending. She endows another mosque, more bread, more blankets, more sultanic messaging in every public square. She tries to smother unrest with generosity, but you can't bribe grief. And the Sipahi? They still don't sing out one evening. You follow Roxolana to a private meeting. She's dressed simple for her. That means only one layer of pearls. The room is small, windowless, with only 3 people inside. Roxolana, a scribe, and Rustam Pasha, her son-in-law, and, conveniently, the Grand Vizier. Rustam is ambitious, oily in both hair and ethics, and entirely loyal to her. He's also deeply unpopular with the military, the perfect person to manage a state too unstable to trust anyone else. They speak in low tones about grain shipments, about troop movements, and then very casually about the Sipahi. Roxolana suggests increased ceremonial recognition. Rustam proposes a few promotions. The scribe just keeps writing. None of it feels sincere. It's theater. But theater is policy in an empire held together by appearances. Still, the Sipahi aren't fooled. They receive the promotions, the bonuses, the flowery speeches, and yet, their loyalty no longer glows. It flickers. Roxolana can't fix it because it's not a logistical issue, it's spiritual. The men feel betrayed, not by their sultan, necessarily, but by the world they thought they were defending. They were trained to believe in strength, in clarity, in earned power. Mustafa fit that mold. Selim does not. Selim is softer, more intellectual, a man who would rather host a symposium than a siege. And while Roxolana has spent years reshaping the palace to suit his temperament, the army still wants a lion, not a philosopher. One peculiar side effect of this unrest is the explosion of subversive poetry. You hear it in the coffee houses, coded verses about fallen trees, birds without nests, fires started by roses. The metaphors are transparent to anyone paying attention. Some verses are attributed to Mustafa's former tutors, others just appear, scrawled onto walls in marketplaces, copied into personal prayer books. The empire's official chroniclers ignore it, of course, but you can feel the unrest gaining cultural texture. A martyr's legend is taking shape, and no number of public fountains can wash it away. Back in the palace, Roxolana senses the shift. She doesn't panic. She doubles down. More letters to foreign courts, more alliances brokered through marriage, more endowments to hospitals and schools. She tries to pull the narrative back into her hands like reins on a horse that no longer listens. And you wonder, for the first time, if she's losing her grip not through failure, but through success. She's built a system so dependent on perception and control that now, as grief and resentment coil beneath the surface, there's no lever left to pull. You find her one morning staring at a tapestry depicting Süleiman's conquest of Belgrade. She touches the threads absently, as if remembering something she never saw but feels deeply. And you wonder, does she ever regret it? Not the power, not the victories, but the compromises. The son lost to secure her own, the ghost who won't leave the Sipahi alone. She doesn't speak. She just stares, and outside, in the training field, another cavalryman sharpens a blade that probably won't be used in battle but might be used in poetry, or in whispers, or worse, in memory. The palace has developed a strange kind of tinnitus. Everything sounds slightly off, like the walls themselves are straining to hear a conversation no one is brave enough to start. It's been years since Roxolana first entered Topkap, years since she stopped being just a concubine and became something else entirely. And yet, tonight, you feel it tightening again, another coil in a long, unblinking game of power. The scent of danger is sharper than clove oil, and the name on everyone's lips, though still spoken with caution, is one that hasn't gone away despite its owner being dead. Ibrahim Pasha. Now, if you haven't been paying attention, Ibrahim was Süleiman's best friend, his closest advisor, the man who rose from slave status to Grand Vizier and for a time seemed utterly untouchable. They called him Makbul, the favorite. The two were inseparable. Ibrahim even married the Sultan's sister. In another timeline, he'd have been the second most powerful man in the empire. But this isn't that timeline. This is the one where Roxolana exists, and Ibrahim, he forgot that in this world, Proximity to the sun means you're the first to burn when the weather changes. You flash back to their early relationship, Süleiman and Ibrahim laughing over chess, discussing military strategies like schoolboys with too much homework and an empire to manage. Ibrahim was brilliant. He was also proud. At some point, he began referring to himself in ways that made other viziers wince. He accepted titles like Sarasker Sultan, which, loosely translated, meant he was calling himself a kind of military sultan. That's not ambition, that's foreshadowing, and Roxolana, she took notes. She didn't need to accuse him. She didn't even need to raise her voice. She just waited, slowly planting seeds of doubt the way she planted trees outside her charity kitchens. She pointed out his excesses, his fondness for foreign luxuries, his influence over provincial governors, his lack of humility, and most importantly, the way his presence slowly began to rival the Sultans. Historians still argue whether she manufactured his downfall or merely highlighted his trajectory. Either way, the result was inevitable. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting, Süleiman invited Ibrahim to dine privately. They shared food, wine, poetry, old times. Nothing seemed amiss. The next morning, Ibrahim was found strangled in his sleep chambers, his body discreetly removed before dawn. No ceremony, no official explanation, just absence. The empire blinked. Roxolana didn't. You sit in her chambers that day, watching as she sips sherbet with calculated serenity. She doesn't celebrate. She doesn't mourn. She simply repositions. With Ibrahim gone, her influence becomes even more expansive. Rustam Pasha, her chosen son-in-law, steps into the Grand Vizier role with uncomfortable ease. Unlike Ibrahim, Rustam doesn't challenge Süleiman. He manages. He soothes. He does exactly what Roxolana needs. He keeps the machine running while she feeds it fuel and direction. But even in death, Ibrahim lingers. He becomes another symbol. Like Mustafa, the courtiers whisper about what happens to those who shine up brightly. The ambassadors tread carefully, noting that even being the Sultan's best friend isn't enough to protect you from proximity. One Venetian report puts it plainly in Istanbul. There is no air so thin as the one breathed closest to the throne. You memorize that line. It explains everything. Roxolana's children, meanwhile, grow up with the knowledge that none of this is normal. They are tutored in philosophy, theology, and the unique art of surviving a court that eats favorites. For breakfast, Selim, increasingly marked as heir, takes the lesson seriously. He cultivates meekness like it's a political asset. He plays dumb when it suits him. He lets others talk first. He rarely disagrees with his tutors, not because he lacks opinions, but because he knows that ambition is a public liability, especially in a family where ambition has a body count. Bayezid, however, continues to challenge this approach. He speaks up. He questions protocol. He trains harder than he's expected to, and you know Roxolana sees the danger not just in his defiance, but in how much he reminds everyone of Mustafa. Charismatic, brave, popular with the military. The parallels are just sharp. To vivid, Roxolana begins distancing herself from him, softly. No public rebuke, just fewer mentions. Less warmth in her tone. The beginnings of a quiet insulation process. She's choosing her survivor, and Bayezid doesn't yet know he's being edited out. One fringe detail that surfaces years later. Ibrahim kept journals, dozens of them. Most were destroyed, but one, smuggled out by a servant, contained a line that reads, "A woman who listens better than a vizier will always become one," with or without a title. Historians love quoting it. Some attribute it to Ibrahim. Others claim it was forged after his death to retroactively dramatize the saga. But you know it doesn't really matter, because the story, whether written in ink or not, is already shaping the way history will remember this era, and the soldiers, they notice. The court may spin elaborate lies, but the Janissaries and Sipahi have their own network. They know about Ibrahim. They knew he wasn't perfect, but they also know he fought for their pay, respected their traditions, and wasn't afraid to speak plainly to the Sultan. His absence creates another vacuum, another soft fold in the empire's fabric that Roxolana tries to patch with silk and legislation. But silk doesn't stop swords. It only distracts them for a while. You sit with Rustam one evening as he drafts a series of edicts. They're well-written, well-targeted, and completely uninspiring. He's not a villain. He's a placeholder, and he knows it. His power comes from marriage, not charisma, from alignment, not innovation. That's how Roxolana prefers it now. Safe hands, steady loyalties, predictable outcomes. The empire, once a storm of sword and sea, is becoming cautious, sheathed, decorative. But even as the outer world begins to adjust to this new style of governance, one that flows through salons instead of campaigns, there's a question starting to form in the minds of the people, the guards, the advisors. It's not whether Roxolana is in control. That's obvious. It's what happens when she's gone. Who holds the threads? Who remembers the pattern? And perhaps most dangerously, who's been pretending to play along, waiting for the right moment to flip the entire board? You find yourself walking slower now, as if the marble halls of top-kept demand reverence, or at least the illusion of it. Every footstep echoes not just through stone, but through memory, through stories half told and half hidden. Somewhere beneath your feet, another prince is buried. No ceremony, no golden tomb, just a name scrubbed from conversation like ink washed from silk. Mustafa, the boy who should have been. His shadow hasn't left, and it never will, not really. It curls beneath banners, it lingers in the folds of court records, and it haunts every decision Roxolana makes. Because killing a prince, whether by direct order or indirect manipulation, isn't a one-time act. It's a perpetual state of alertness, a trauma that echoes forward. And you've been watching long enough to know what happens next. The year is 1553. The empire is restless. The Sultan, aging and increasingly removed from the mechanics of rule, now occupies his time with poetry and prayer. Süleiman's beard has more gray than gold these days, and the fire that once drove him to expand the empire into 3 continents now flickers behind tired eyes. You watch him recite verses in the palace garden, surrounded by attendants who know not to speak unless addressed. His heart beats slower now, not from illness, but from the weight of things left unsaid, and chief among them is the death of his firstborn. He doesn't speak of Mustafa. He doesn't visit his grave. But he dreams, because he's begun calling his scribes late at night, dictating lines about stars falling out of the sky, about thrones without heirs, about water that cannot quench. Roxolana reads them in silence. She never FLINCHES.SELIM, her chosen son, has grown into his role with the kind of sluggish grace that alarms everyone except Roxolana. He's not a warrior. He doesn't pretend to be. He prefers libraries to barracks, and his tastes run toward wine, music, and softly spoken sycophants. You might expect this to weaken his claim, but Roxolana's long game has never been about charisma. It's about inevitability. Selim doesn't need to conquer. He just needs to survive. The empire is already shaped around him like a velvet glove. The bureaucracy, the scribes, the guards, they've been aligned through years of quiet appointments and even quieter dismissals. By the time Selim officially becomes heir apparent, the question is no longer is he ready, but who's. Still pretending he won't be, but not everyone accepts inevitability. Bayezid, the other surviving son, remains the inconvenient variable. Charming, strong, intelligent, and most critically, popular. He's inherited not only his mother's steel, but also some of Mustafa's old military loyalty. You see it in the way young officers gravitate toward him, in how provincial governors pause before signing letters of allegiance to Selim. They remember how easily a favorite can fall, and Bayezid, he's no fool. He sees the empire narrowing, and around a man who never earned its awe. So he pushes, not openly, but he speaks more frequently at court. He travels more often. He gathers his own scribes, his own loyalists, and somewhere along the line, a line is crossed not with blood, but with momentum. The court begins to fracture again. This time, less visibly, more like hairline cracks in an ancient vase. Advisors take sides. Rumors travel faster than messengers. A letter intercepted between 2 provincial governors references the second storm. It doesn't say who the storm is. It doesn't have to, and Roxolana, she's already moving. She calls Rustam Pasha in the middle of the night, and the next day, a new decree is issued regulating the mobility of royal princes. It's dressed in the language of safety. While it's a leash, historians still argue whether Bayezid ever truly intended to revolt, or if he was merely reacting to the noose tightening around his future. But in a system where perception becomes reality, intent is irrelevant. Roxolana begins the slow, deliberate process of politically isolating His allies are reassigned, his messages delayed, his audiences with the Sultan reduced. And Selim, he says nothing. He smiles politely. He asks about the next poetry recital. He plays the harmless fool so well you almost forget he's already. Then comes the moment that changes everything. Süleiman, perhaps sensing the tension or perhaps acting on Roxolana's counsel, sends both Selim and Bayezid to govern distant provinces opposite ends of the empire. The idea is ancient. Separate the princes, keep the peace, but geography can't mend ambition. Bayezid sees the writing on the wall. He knows what happened to Mustafa. He knows what happened to Ibrahim, and he begins to prepare for the worst. He reaches out to Persian allies. He strengthens his retinue. He stops sending daily reports to Istanbul. It doesn't take long before the accusation comes: rebellion, treason. Bayezid insists it's a misunderstanding. He asks for a formal inquiry, but no one listens. The Sultan's patience, already threadbare, snaps. An army is dispatched not led by Süleiman himself, but by Selim, not to negotiate, to end it. And so it happens again. Another tent, another prince, another son of the empire, strangled not by sword, but by system. Bayezid dies in Persia after being captured and handed over, some say, sold by the very allies he thought would protect him. His sons are executed with him. It's not a battle. It's a message. And the message is clear. Succession in the Ottoman court isn't a privilege. It's a purge. Roxolana doesn't live to see it. She dies a year before Bayezid's final fall. Some say she was sick. Others say she simply ran out of fight. Either way, her end is quiet. No scandal. No drama. Just a burial in the courtyard. Of the mosque she commissioned, her name etched into the stone for eternity. The empire mourns, but carefully. The court breathes a little easier. And Selim? Selim becomes heir with no rivals left. But the cost, oh, the cost. 2 sons gone, a court hollowed out, a military that no longer sings, and an empire that, wow, still vast, now seems held together less by belief and more by routine. Roxolana got everything she wanted, her sons on the throne, her legacy built into the very walls of the capital, and yet, you sit there wondering, was it worth it? The silence after Roxolana's death is unlike any that came before. It doesn't whisper. It hovers. You notice it in the rhythm of footsteps around the palace too careful, like everyone's afraid to step on the ghost she left behind. Her chambers remain untouched for weeks. The clove oil still lingers faintly in the curtains. The letters she never sent lie folded neatly in drawers, pressed between pages of Quranic verses and architectural sketches. But the real legacy doesn't live in furniture or fragrances. It lives in the fact that, for the first time in centuries, the Sultan has no harem favorite to balance his moods, whisper suggestions, or redirect his fury. The throne is colder now, not because Roxolana was warm, but because her absence reveals just how much she had been running things. You'd expect the court to sigh in relief, to loosen its collars and resume its old pace. Instead, it hesitates. Without Roxolana, the balance she curated so obsessively begins to teeter. The system still runs, sure. The ministers still file their reports. The scribes still copy poetry and proclamations. But something essential is missing: the glue that bound all these egos, ambitions, and dangers into a single narrative. Süleiman is still the Sultan, but he's visibly older, weighed down by a grief he won't name. Some say he spends hours alone in her mosque, just sitting, not praying, just existing in the echo of her presence. And then, in a move that would have seemed unthinkable a generation earlier, Süleiman does something radical. He makes it official. Roxolana was not just a concubine. She was his legal wife, the first, in over 100 years, a formal, written, recognized imperial marriage. You blink when the decree comes through, not because it's shocking everyone already knew what they were, but because it's so public. It's a posthumous statement, one that rewrites how future historians, scholars, and gossip mongers will frame her legacy. She wasn't a clever concubine who manipulated her way into influence. She was the Sultan's wife, period. This changes everything. It elevates her children to a different tier of legitimacy. It reshapes the dynasty's own internal mythology. Suddenly, Selim isn't just the son of a favored woman. He's the product of a royal marriage. And for an empire obsessed with appearances, that's an administrative gold mine. The scribes go into overdrive. Roxolana's name begins appearing more prominently in court records. new stories about her charity work surface. Her image softens, even as everyone remembers how sharp she was. But here's the thing, this legal twist is not just romantic, it's strategic. By retroactively declaring Roxolana a wife, Süleiman sends a clear message. The harem is no longer just a pleasure vault. It's a place of real dynastic origin, and the women inside, they aren't just ornaments, they're stakeholders. This, more than any military conquest, is Süleiman's legacy, a shift from conquest to consolidation, from war to inheritance. And it's Roxolana who paved the way. Of course, this doesn't go down smoothly with everyone. The old guard, especially the more conservative Ulema and the military elites, began to grumble louder. They tolerated Roxolana's influence because she worked through private channels. But this is official policy now, and they know what's coming. More visibility for women, more integration of the harem into politics, more blurred lines. For an empire that built its mystique on rigid roles, this is a cultural tectonic shift. The military elite, already strained by the deaths of Mustafa and Bayezid, now feel completely sidelined. The Sultanate, once rooted in martial might, is becoming something else, more ceremonial, more hereditary, more velvet dot, and inside the harem itself, this new precedent ripples fast. The concubines watch with widened eyes. The idea that one of them can someday be more than a mother of sons, that she could be a wife with a mosque, with a seat in imperial memory, sends shivers through the marble halls. Ambitions evolve. Etiquette tightens. The pecking order calcifies. Where once the harem was fluid, dynamic, survival-based, it now starts to resemble a royal academy. The women begin training not just in music and poetry, but in diplomacy, policy, languages. You hear one girl quoting Persian metaphysics to another during a sewing lesson. That's not an accident. That's curriculum.selim. Meanwhile, takes his place as heir apparent with a kind of baffled relief. His path has been cleared so thoroughly that even he seems unsure whether to step forward or wait for someone to nudge him. He's still not a warrior. He still drinks more than he should. But now, thanks to Roxolana's posthumous status boost, his weaknesses feel less like liabilities and more like quirks. The prince with a poet's soul. Some courtiers call him, which is a very polite way of saying he's not dead yet. But there's another layer to this legal marriage twist, one that most historians gloss over. By marrying Roxolana, Süleiman broke a centuries-old practice designed specifically to prevent women from gaining political leverage. You see, in the traditional Ottoman model, concubines could only have one son. After that, they were retired to a provincial palace with their child, never to return. This ensured no single woman could monopolize the sultan's affections or worse, become a political force in the capital. Roxolana smashed that model to pieces. She stayed. She bore multiple sons. She became a permanent court presence. And now, as his wife, she rewrote the rulebook from the grave. Future concubines take note. So do their sons. So do their eunuchs, their scribes, and their foreign observers. One French ambassador writes home that the harem is now a second court unto itself, with laws and loyalties as dense as any parliament. He's not wrong. The shift is so thorough, so total, that it leaves no room for nostalgia. The empire won't go back. It can't. The Sultanate of women is now unofficially, undeniably underway, and Roxolana is still gone. Still haunting is its founding mother. You pass her tomb one evening. It's quiet, modest by imperial standards, but the inscription says everything. She who brought light to the palace. You pause, because if by light they mean governance, surveillance, strategy, and the re-engineering of Ottoman succession, then yes, she did, and the palace will never be the same. The harem, once a fragrant stage for whispered rivalry and occasional romance, has now turned into something else entirely, a velvet prison with painted ceilings and institutionalized paranoia. You notice it immediately. The air isn't flirtatious anymore. It's taut, electric, shaped by the aftershock of Roxolana's legacy. Her influence, though posthumous, still coils through every corridor like perfume clinging to old fabric. The women here are no longer merely groomed for charm. They're being trained like diplomats with tiaras, and it's unsettling. The rules are tighter, the hierarchy stricter. You see girls as young as 12 sitting perfectly upright, rehearsing responses to hypothetical political crises as if they're preparing for a summit, not a seduction. There are no mistakes allowed, no second chances. The harem now functions less like a garden of delight and more like a monastery designed by a politician. You pass by a group of concubines memorizing fiscal policy reports translated into Arabic. One of them corrects the others on a revenue statistic. From the Anatolian Beyliks, she can't be older than 15. A eunuch standing nearby nods approvingly, then marks something in a ledger. You suspect he's tracking more than just performance. He's watching for initiative, for risk takers, for potential, because Roxalana may be gone. But the expectation she created that a woman could wield the empire through the Sultan's favor has become a kind of invisible job posting. Every girl now dreams not just of bearing a prince, but of becoming the next puppet master behind the silk screens. The irony is delicious. Roxalana broke the system, and the system responded by turning her into the curriculum.selim, now crowned. Prince in all but ceremony, seems largely unaware or uninterested in the evolution of the harem. He visits less frequently than his father once did. His affections are passive, scattered, sometimes even outsourced through poetry or gifts rather than conversation. Some say he finds the harem too intense. Others whisper that he prefers his wine over women. But whatever the reason, his distance creates a vacuum, and vacuums in the palace, always dangerous, they invite ambition. They invite competition. And now, with the Sultan's health declining and Selim's ascendancy practically guaranteed, the women are no longer maneuvering to become his lover, they're maneuvering to become his mother's replacement. Because here's the part no one writes into the fairy tale. The valid Sultan, the Queen Mother, holds more power than any wife or concubine ever could. And with Roxalana gone, that title is currently vacant. Temporarily, you sense the competition even behind the most innocent gestures. A bowl of fruit served early, a smile held too long, a compliment phrased like a warning. These women aren't just practicing court etiquette, they're playing emotional chess, with pieces carved from gossip and silk, and the stakes, absolute control over the next generation of Ottoman rule. One particularly shrewd player emerges quickly, Nurbanu, a Venetian-born beauty with a razor-sharp mind hidden beneath perfect posture. She's already caught Selim's eye well. As much as anything can catch Selim's wine-blurred attention, and she's managing to build alliances within the harem staff at an impressive rate. Eunuchs, scribes, seamstresses, everyone seems to owe her a favor or a secret. Historians still argue whether she studied Roxalana's life or simply followed the scent of opportunity. But her timing is impeccable. She arrives just as Selim begins his slow drift toward the throne, and you can feel the palace beginning to mold around her, testing her shape. Meanwhile, the political atmosphere outside the harem grows staler. By the day, Süleiman, now nearing the end of his life, rarely leaves his quarters. His health is fragile, his moods unpredictable. You overhear discussions about succession cloaked in polite language. When the time comes, preparation for transition, continuity of grace. Everyone's pretending to be calm. No one is. The empire is still massive, still powerful. But there's an unmistakable fatigue in its movements. Campaigns drag on, reforms stall, provinces grumble. And yet, the court holds its breath, waiting for the final breath of a man once called the lawgiver. Back in the harem, the rituals continue, baths, lessons, ceremonies. But there's a hollowness now, a strange sense that something essential has passed, and no one quite knows how to recreate it. You see older concubines murmuring prayers, not for their own futures, but for the memory of a time when the palace felt less manufactured, when the harem was wild and dangerous and thrilling. Roxalana's reign may have brought clarity, but it also brought rigidity, and rigidity, in a place built on flexibility, always breeds discontent. Even the eunuchs sense it. Their reports grow longer, more detailed, and increasingly paranoid. They monitor friendships. They track glances. One report lists a concubine's laugh as to frequent. Another notes that a letter sent to a provincial family included an unusual metaphor for the moon. It's all a bit absurd, but it makes perfect sense in a palace where metaphor is currency and subtext can kill. You pass the chief eunuch's office and hear him mutter something about the illusion of order. You don't ask what he means. You already know. The strange thing is, the more orderly the harem becomes, the more chaotic its emotions get. These women, hyper-trained and ultra-disciplined, have nowhere to direct their ambition. Selim doesn't engage. The Sultan is dying, and so their energy turns inward. Factions form. Secret friendships develop. Alliances shift weekly. It's not the old-school hair-pulling drama of romantic rivals, it's something colder, more strategic. The girl gets accused of heresy not because she's a heretic, but because she told a joke that hinted at disloyalty. Another disappears after suggesting Selim favored one son over another. No proof, no trial, just absence. You realize something chilling. The harem no longer exists to serve the sultan. It exists to sustain itself. It's become a self-feeding organism, one where survival is the only currency, and love, affection, even motherhood are all just pathways to political leverage. Roxolana didn't just change the rules. She built a labyrinth, and now everyone's trapped inside it, even the people who think they're winning. And yet, somewhere in this intricate mess, there's a twisted beauty. You see it in how thoroughly these women have mastered the game, in how completely they've turned captivity into strategy. One concubine paints portraits of the empire's provinces using coded symbols. Another writes lullabies that double as political satire. These aren't just survivors. They're creators, architects, ghostwriters of an empire that still pretends to be patriarchal even as it dances to their rhythm. But you can't help but wonder if this palace is now a prison, and if every smile is a calculation. What happens when someone stops pretending? When someone inside this fragile, silk-draped machine decides they're done playing by Roxolana's rules? You don't know yet, but you feel it coming. Just like the end of a long note in a sad song, you know the next act is already tuning its instruments, and the harem is still listening. You wake to the sound of sandalwood oil being poured, a whisper soft glug that somehow carries through the vast, echoing chambers of the palace like a trumpet. Everything here is quiet, but it's the kind of quiet that prickles the way of forest does before a storm. And today, the stillness is focused on one room in particular. It's smaller than the throne room, humbler than the harem's gilded halls, but somehow heavier than both. This is where Roxolana used to meet with her sons, where she planned, where she taught them how to breathe in a world that wanted them to drown in silk. Now it belongs to Selim, and you'd think, after everything his mother orchestrated, he'd step into the role with confidence. But instead, you find a man sitting at the center of power, looking a little bit like he wishes he was anywhere else. Selim has finally become Sultan Selim II. The transition wasn't marked by trumpets or glorious fanfare. It came quietly, like a shift in weather. Süleiman died during a campaign in Hungary, reportedly sitting upright in his tent, dressed in white, holding a string of prayer beads. They didn't announce it immediately. The viziers waited. They wanted Selim in Istanbul before the news broke, before rival factions had time to conspire. And when Selim finally returned to the capital, it was not with a roar, but with the delicate sound of the palace rearranging itself around a man it had long expected and never quite respected. He is now the most powerful man in one of the largest empires the world has ever seen, and yet, you could see it in his shoulders. He would rather be drinking, not in celebration, just drinking. This is a man who spent his life shadowed by legends, a father called the Lawgiver, a mother who practically ghost-wrote the government, brothers who died for the very position he now holds. And yet he steps into it not with triumph, but with the heavy sigh of a man who knows the cost of being the last son standing. The court doesn't know what to do with him. The Janissaries, still stiff from the Mustafa Bey, is at purges, try to show deference, but their cheers are subdued. The viziers test him with subtle traps raised as questions about provincial policy or grain tariffs, but Selim, to everyone's surprise, doesn't stumble. He doesn't answer either. He delegates immediately, efficiently. Rustam Pasha remains in position for a time, but it's clear that Selim has no intention of micromanaging. He rules the way some people manage difficult group chats, sporadically with long pauses, and by appointing moderators who do most of the talking. And what of the harem? Well, it doesn't know whether to mourn or celebrate. Roxolana's absence still casts a long shadow, but the vacuum she left behind is already being filled. Nurbanu, the clever, calculating concubine from Venice, has officially given Selim a son, Murad, and with Roxolana gone, Nurbanu sees the path ahead like an open road. She doesn't walk it. She sprints. Her hair is darker, her features sharper, but her strategy is pure homage. She flatters the eunuchs, secures alliances, and starts inserting herself into diplomatic correspondence just enough to seem helpful, not overreaching. You catch her one morning watching the court with a stare that could sand marble. She's not waiting for her moment. She's building a .selim, meanwhile, leans further into his comforts. Historians often paint him as lazy, but it's not quite that. He's detached. Yes, he prefers poetry readings to council meetings, and he spends more time in bathhouses than war rooms. But he's not stupid. He's just uninterested in the theater of power. He's already won the only game that mattered. He outlived his brothers. Everything else feels like filler, and if he can enjoy himself while the empire mostly runs itself, even better. Still, cracks begin to form. His reliance on advisors becomes a point of contention. Governors feel emboldened to act more independently. Naval commanders complain about funding. Religious scholars raise eyebrows at his increasingly public indulgences. And then there's Cyprus, the beautiful, strategic island in the eastern Mediterranean that Venice technically controls, but which many Ottomans believe should be theirs. The argument is equal parts piety, legacy, and wine. Yes, wine, because the rumor never confirmed, always repeated, is that Selim wants Cyprus because it produces a particularly fine vintage. Historians still argue whether that's true or just a perfect metaphor for his reign. Either way, the gears begin turning. Cyprus becomes his obsession. Back in the harem, Nurbanu uses the war talk to consolidate her position. She increases her public charity work, commissions scholars to educate Murad in both Sunni orthodoxy and administrative law, and starts referring to herself not just as the Sultan's favorite, but as the mother of the empire's future. It's subtle, but effective. She even sponsors a series of illuminated manuscripts that depict idealized Ottoman queens, each one suspiciously resembling her more than any historical figure. If Roxolana gave the empire its first visible consort, Nurbanu is determined to become its first irreplaceable one. And yet, for all the maneuvering, for all the intrigue, something in the empire feels off. The pulse is uneven. Trade continues, borders hold, but the center, the palace itself, it's becoming a vacuum. Selim doesn't inspire fear or loyalty. He inspires delegation, and in his absence of presence, the machinery of empire begins to run on inertia. That's the most dangerous engine of all, because when it breaks, no one knows how to fix it. One obscure moment captures it perfectly. A diplomat from France visits the court and notes that Selim received him with kindness but no interest, and spent most of their meeting composing a haiku in Turkish about the color of apricots. That's not incompetence. That's a man who's already somewhere else, and the empire, it follows, slowly, uneasily. You leave the audience hall and pass a fountain where water still runs as it always has, smooth, indifferent. The tiles are chipped now. The paint fades faster. The scribes still work, but their records feel more like fiction than governance. The guards still patrol, but their uniforms are fraying. Roxolana built a fortress. Selim inherited it, but no, one's maintaining it. And the empire is starting to notice. You're standing on a roof again, not for the view, though the Bosphorus still glitters like a spilled tray of diamonds. You're here because from up here, you can watch the patterns, watch the people flow through the palace like blood through veins that no longer know how to pulse on their own. And inside, in the center of all this, a woman is dying. Roxolana's absence has left a power structure that is working, yes, but without her orchestration, it's like a song on loop functioning, but slowly growing unbearable. The tempo has slowed, the energy has dulled, and now Selim is doing what all men raised in shadow eventually do. He's letting gravity decide his direction. Down. Selim II is not a tyrant. He's not a monster. That would have required effort. What he is uninterested. His reign, now fully underway, is characterized less by bold decisions and more by the delegation of every problem to someone else. He drinks more. He appears less. He signs documents he doesn't read and praises advisors he doesn't trust. His public appearances are so rare that satirical poems start circulating suggesting he has been replaced by a wax dummy with an unusually good sense of rhythm. You think that's probably unfair. The wax dummy might actually care more, and yet, somehow, the empire continues because of two things: the inertia of a massive, deeply embedded imperial system and the woman behind it, Nurbanu. She is no longer maneuvering for position. She has it. She holds the invisible title of valid sultan, the sultan's mother, and wields it with a precision that would make Roxolana proud and maybe a little nervous. She knows exactly what power she has and exactly how far she can push it. Her son Murad, still young, is being groomed not just to rule, but to restore meaning to a title his father has turned into a pastime. Nurbanu's methods are subtler than Roxolana's. She doesn't provoke, she orchestrates, she avoids scandal, not by silencing critics, but by preempting them. Every Friday, she donates food in her name. Every Tuesday, she hosts visiting scholars for debates she doesn't need to attend, but does. Every whisper that suggests she's overstepping is met with a very public gesture of piety, like funding the repair of a mosque that no one had touched since Süleiman's reign. Historians still debate whether she was genuinely devout or just brilliantly strategic. You suspect she saw no difference. Faith and power, after all, often wear the same robes, and yet cracks show, not in her behavior, but in the world around her. The bureaucracy is bloated. The court, while still ceremonial, has lost its soul. Advisors squabble not over policy, but over who gets to avoid responsibility for failed decisions. The military has become sluggish. Its elite corps, the janissaries, more invested in market privileges than military innovation. The tax system still collects, but enforcement is uneven. Provinces are drifting, not seceding, but meandering, like children at the edge of a campfire looking for a chance to sneak away. One of the clearest examples of the decline comes in the form of an unexpected and deeply humiliating disaster. The Ottoman Navy, once the terror of the Mediterranean, faces off against a coalition of Christian powers at the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. The result? Catastrophic. Ships lost, commanders captured, prestige shattered. The empire loses its maritime dominance in a single day. Selim reacts by drinking. Nurbanu, to her credit, shifts gears. She arranges for new ships to be built. She oversees the rehabilitation of naval funding. She even sends emissaries to smooth over relations with Venice and Spain. But the sting of Lepanto sticks. It becomes a symbol not just of military decline, but of imperial exhaustion. Inside the palace, you begin to notice how hollow the rituals have become. The harem, once a theater of emotional warfare and dynastic ambition, now functions more like a glorified finishing school. The women are still beautiful, still brilliant, but their energy feels rehearsed. There's no Roxolana to defy, no clear rival to fear. Nurbanu has secured her position so thoroughly that the younger concubines treat her less like a political opponent and more like a department head. You hear one girl whisper that she hopes to be a good servant to the system, not a queen, not a mother of sultans, just a cog. Nurbanu tries to combat this. She commissions new education programs. She brings in scholars to teach logic, philosophy, and languages: Greek, Persian, even some Latin. But there's only so much you can do when the man in charge doesn't seem to care. Selim rarely visits the harem anymore. He's often found in his private bathhouse, surrounded by musicians, telling the same story about his favorite wine from Cyprus to people who can't afford to look bored. Sometimes he writes poems. Occasionally, he reads dispatches. Mostly, he lets others decide what history will say about him, and history, so far, has chosen the title Selim the Sought. One curious moment stands out. Selim invites a group of Sufi mystics to court, perhaps as a PR move, perhaps out of genuine curiosity. They perform a series of whirling dances, recitations, and philosophical parables. At the end, one asks him directly, "What do you seek in your rule?" Selim pauses, clearly not expecting the question. After a long silence, he says, "Peace, and the freedom to be forgotten." The court applauds, unsure if it's a joke. You're not so sure it is. But peace is slippery. The provinces are restive. The Safavids to the east remain a persistent threat. Even the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth starts testing the boundaries of Ottoman patience. And through all this, it's Nurbanu, not Selim, who manages correspondence, who brokers treaties, who smooths the ripples caused by her son's disinterest. You watch her one evening at her writing desk, surrounded by maps, scrolls, and 3 separate translators. She's not smiling. She's working, because someone has to. She doesn't live to see her son die. Selim falls ill after a particularly intense night of revelry, and though the doctors try their best leeches, herbs, whispered prayers, his body is too soft to warn. He dies in 1574, quietly, without a final speech or dramatic farewell. And when the announcement comes, the court doesn't weep. It exhales. Nurbanu, already sick herself, spends her final days ensuring that her son Murad ascends without opposition. That's her final act. securing continuity. It's not glorious. It's not poetic. It's just necessary. You look back at Selim's reign and realize something strange. It worked. Not well. Not brilliantly. But it didn't collapse. He didn't burn the empire down. He didn't lose control. He coasted. And because Roxolana had built something so structurally sound, and Nurbanu reinforced it brick by brick, even a man more interested in grapes than governance can hold the wheel. But the cracks are wider now, and the next sultan, he won't have the luxury of detachment. You wake up in a palace that smells different now, not of saffron or sandalwood, but of fresh parchment, wet ink, and the dry, static tension that follows a succession. Selim too is gone, and with his death, the reign of wine-sweet inertia finally ends. But this isn't a story about decay. It's about what happens after a slow fire finally burns out, and someone has to walk into the smoke-filled room and figure out what's still standing. That someone is Murad III, Roxolana's grandson, Nurbanu's son, and as he takes the throne, you can almost hear the gears groaning back into motion, not smoothly, not easily, but definitely with purpose. Murad is 30 years old when he becomes Sultan. He's educated, articulate, and unlike his father, shows signs of genuine interest in governance, though perhaps not for the reasons you'd expect. He's a man shaped entirely by harem politics, born into a palace where women ran the show, raised under the shadow of Roxolana's ghost and Nurbanu's ruling hand. He understands that the imperial game isn't played on the battlefield anymore. It's played in whispers, signatures, and precisely folded letters sealed with the right shade of wax. And Murad has been taking notes. He ascends to the throne with little resistance because Nurbanu made sure of it. Her last months were spent orchestrating a transition that would make a Broadway stage. Manager weak, allies were paid off, rivals were relocated, every pillow fluffed, every eunuch sworn to silence until Murad's seat was warm. And yet, for all the smoothness, something darker simmers beneath the surface. You see it in the quick, quiet executions that follow his coronation. Brothers, cousins, distant male relatives, all strangled, not out of spite, not even out of paranoia, out of protocol. The law of fratricide, once a chilling footnote in Ottoman policy, is now carried out like laundry efficient, silent, expected, and Murad, while outwardly calm, begins his rule drenched in the blood of people who once shared his toys. Historians still argue about how involved he really was. Some claim he cried during the executions. Others say he didn't blink. Either way, the result is the same. An empire with only one male voice at the top. Clean, simple, brutal. Just the way Roxolana envisioned it. Murad's reign begins with promise. He holds audiences with scholars, listens to grievances, reads military reports. He even proposes judicial reforms in his first year. But as the months pass, you begin to see the weight settle on him. Power doesn't suit everyone the same way. For some, it's a crown. For Murad, it's a corset, tight, restrictive, heavy with the shape of ancestors he can't seem to live up to. And so, like his father before him, he retreats not into wine, but into mysticism, paranoia, and a deep, consuming melancholy. You notice a change in his eyes. He begins avoiding public appearances. He spends long hours in private prayer. He orders dozens of astrologers to consult the stars before every decision. He builds new wings onto the palace, not for officials, but for his ever-expanding harem, which now includes over 100 concubines. One report claims he fathered more than 100 children, though historians suspect that number includes exaggerations and possibly some metaphor. Still, the point stands. Murad distracts himself with quantity, women, musicians, astrologers, anything. But governance, which means, of course, that someone else steps in, enters Safai, Murad's chief consort, another woman from Venetian origins, much like Nurbanu before her. Safai rises quickly through the ranks not by force, but by finesse. She doesn't confront Murad's gloom. She absorbs it, makes space for it, and in doing so becomes indispensable. She learns which foods he'll eat when depressed, which songs soften his moods, which dreams make him reach for prayer beads. More importantly, she learns the language of influence, letters, gifts, strategic silences. Safai doesn't shout to be heard. She whispers and lets others amplify her. Before long, she becomes the de facto valid sultan, and she's not subtle about it. She begins corresponding with Elizabeth I of England. Yes, the actual queen of England. The letters are polite, flowery, laced with diplomacy, and the kind of low-key imperial flex that only the powerful women running massive empires can pull off. Sophie signs her letters with grace, mentions trade routes, shares compliments about English textiles. You imagine the Elizabethan court blinking at the idea of a sultan writing with more poise and precision than half their diplomats. But back in Istanbul, Sophie is more than charming letters. She's policy. She manages palace appointments, supervises imperial charities, and ensures that Murad's erratic behavior never leaves the confines of rumor. When foreign ambassadors describe the Ottoman court during this period, they often mention a calm hand behind the curtain. That's her. She even has her own spy network, not in the Jason Bourne sense, in the every pillow has ears sense. Eunuchs loyal to her whisper the pulse of the palace back to her before lunch. Still, things outside the palace are fraying. Wars with the Safavids in the east and the Habsburgs in the west stretch the military thin. Inflation creeps in. The Devshirm system, the forced conscription of Christian boys, is starting to face resistance in the provinces. The Janissaries, once elite, are increasingly corrupt and politicized. And Murad has become more of a symbol than a sovereign. He issues decrees written by others. He appears only for major festivals. His words are fewer, his letters more cryptic. He's slipping, but the palace machine keeps going. You wonder if he ever thinks about Roxolana, about the legacy she engineered. Because if she built a dynasty of controlled chaos, he's the final heir of that design. The last piece before it all starts to tremble. He lives in a world she created, but one he cannot command. He watches his children play in the same gardens where he once watched executions. He walks the halls lined with portraits of his ancestors, including the poets and killers and philosophers who each left their mark. And he knows, as you know, that his mark will be different. He dies in 1595, quietly after a long illness. No dramatic collapse, no poetic last words. Just another passing in a palace that no longer cries for sultans, only prepares for the next one. His son, Mehmed III, is already waiting. Another boy raised in fear, trained in silence and preparing to kill his brothers before breakfast, just in case. You're not sure what wakes you. Maybe it's the shuffling of slippered feet, or the wind curling through the lattice like a rumor. Maybe it's the dream you just had where Roxolana's portrait turns and winks at you as the palace tilts, like a capsizing ship. Either way, you're awake now, and Istanbul, though calm on the surface, is bracing for another ripple. Selim the Sod is long buried. Murad III just followed him into shadow, and now the stage belongs to a man who, before this morning, was merely another cautious son in a palace that eats princes like dates. Mehmed III, Roxolana's great-grandson. You sit with the realization this love triangle has outlasted its lovers, and the legacy, still mutating. Mehmed's accession is drenched in ceremony, but what happens before the drums and banners is far more chilling. He begins his reign by executing his 19 brothers. Yes, 19. It is the most infamous purge in Ottoman history. It's not whispered. It's known. The palace is still echoing with it. Their bodies are removed quietly, their names struck from formal lists, their childhood tutors reassigned without so much as a raised eyebrow. You ask why and receive the same answer whispered again and again. It is the law of fratricide, a policy once used sparingly, now performed with bureaucratic precision. And Mehmed, he doesn't gloat, he doesn't grieve, he prays publicly, he fasts, he sponsors religious scholars. He does everything expected of a devout Muslim ruler except hesitate. You wonder if that's what his mother, Sophie, taught him. Not how to love, not how to rule, but how to eliminate threats before they become legends. Because she's still here too, older now, but no less calculating. She wears darker robes, speaks less often, but her eyes still scan a room like she's counting how many knives it would take to control it. And for now, Mehmed lets her, but he's not a puppet. That's where everyone misjudges him. Yes, he leans heavily on his mother in the early months. Yes, she manages the court while he adjusts to a throne still warm with the ghost of Murad. But Mehmed is a new kind of ruler, one shaped by isolation, paranoia, and pressure. He's never known the battlefield, only walls, only rituals. He steps into power not with confidence, but with doctrine. The empire, he believes, must be purified, Ray-centered, Ray-Islamized. He begins pushing clerical influence deeper into court life. Music is discouraged. Celebrations shorten. The mood changes. Not quite puritanical, but certainly more austere. And yet, you sense the dissonance. Because even as he postures as the pious sultan, Mehmed is surrounded by the same lavish architecture, the same clinking of coffee cups behind doors, the same palace where women still move power like a breeze reshaping curtains. Safi, though quieter now, still holds the keys to the harem. She still receives reports. She still chooses which concubines see her son, which don't, which may one day bear his heir. The system remains, the architecture holds, but the paint is flaking, the gold is duller, even the eunuchs seem weary still efficient, but somehow thinner in spirit. You can't help but think that maybe the empire itself is tired of pretending. The harem is just about beauty. One moment reveals the shift more than any royal edict. Mehmed travels to the battlefield, not out of ambition, but obligation. The war with Austria has escalated. The Janissaries are restless, muttering that a sultan who's never seen blood is no sultan at all. So Mehmed rides, not with pride, but with dread, and when he arrives at the campaign, something miraculous happens. He wins. The Battle of Kirstes in 1596 is brutal, chaotic, almost accidental in its Ottoman victory, but it works. He returns a hero, and yet, he doesn't smile. Back in Istanbul, the mood lifts temporarily, the court breathes, but Mehmed changes, not into a war-hungry lion, but into something darker. He becomes more withdrawn. He starts suspecting his own viziers. He dismisses old allies. Safi tries to maintain order, but for the first time, her son begins refusing her suggestions. He builds his own networks, his own messengers. He even starts asking the harem staff to report on her. The woman who built his path is now under surveillance from the man who walks it. Historians still debate whether this turn against Safi was paranoia or policy. Some suggest a new wave of religious advisors convinced Mehmed that even his mother's influence was a risk to his legitimacy. Others claim he simply resented her for what she made him do 19 brothers. After all, that's a weight no prayer can wash away. And then there's the Cyprus deal. Years before, under Selim II, the Ottomans had taken the island in a move, supposedly motivated by strategic interest, but still rumored to be about wine. That rumor hasn't aged well. The cost of keeping Cyprus is now a constant naval drain. Trade routes shift. Piracy increases. The Mediterranean, once an Ottoman lake, now feels contested. And Mehmed, he sees it not as a geopolitical concern, but as evidence of divine displeasure. He doubles down on religious reform. More mosques, stricter laws. He starts funding scholars no more for orthodoxy than insight. The palace begins to mirror the sermon, and what of the harem now? It grows. It always grows, but differently. There's less laughter, fewer musicians. The women are still trained in language and calligraphy, but now with added emphasis on Quranic recitation. You see one girl punished not for gossiping, but for singing too loudly. The harem becomes a shadow of itself, not less powerful, but more cloaked, more silent, more doctrinal. Safi adapts. She always adapts. She retreats from public ceremonies, appears only during major holidays, and focuses her energy on maintaining the stability of the dynasty. Her new project, grooming her grandson. She sees what Mehmed has become, and she knows that when he fades, the next boy must be ready to pull the thread she's spent decades weaving. She calls the new tutors, orders special food for the boy, reviews his prayers. It's the same game, different generation, but this time the stakes feel higher. The empire is beginning to show stress fractures. The provinces are twitching. The bureaucracy is fattening like overfed sheep, and you sit by the window, watching the torches being lit for another night in a palace that has become more mausoleum than court. The Ottoman Empire is still strong, still feared, but its heartbeat, that's growing irregular, and every beat, you realize, echoes with the memory of a woman who died generations ago, but whose design still grips the crown like fingers that refuse to unclench. You start to notice something odd, something that creeps in not like a shadow, but like mold, quiet, slow, and suddenly everywhere. The palace still sparkles. The calligraphy still glows under the lamplight, but the people inside, they're tired, not from labor or grief or war, but from holding still for too long. It's the women you notice first. The concubines, the attendants, Even the valid sultan's own circle, they move like dancers still locked in a choreography, choreographed by ghosts. They bow, they serve, they smile on cue, but their eyes are watching something else, something out of reach. They are waiting, and not in the way a hopeful girl waits for the sultan to call her name, but in the way a pawn waits for the board to crack. Mehmed III's reign continues, but it isn't ruling. It's more like hovering. His orders are fewer now, his public appearances even rarer, the campaigns slow, the decrees become repetitive. The court is run by inertia, not intention, and this is where the women begin to move again. Not all at once, not loudly, but in small, quiet acts that are somehow more radical than rebellion. The harem begins to evolve again, from a rigid institution into a loose confederacy of silent operators, each playing her own game, and in the midst of it, a few women rise not by shouting, not by scheming, but by surviving. They're not famous, not like Roxalana, not like Safi. They don't get monster memoirs, but you see them. The old concubine who survived 3 sultans and now mentors the new girls, with the calm detachment of a woman who knows that love is fiction and favor is physics. The seamstress who writes coded poetry into the hems of the valid sultans' gowns. The bath attendant who memorizes every whisper and trades her memory for medicine for her cousins. Son, these are the consorts and courtesans of Mehmed III's reign, not just ornaments or mothers, but record keepers, ghost whisperers, institutional memory personified. The most visible among them is Handan Sultan, Mehmed's favorite and mother. Of his son Ahmed, Handan is soft-spoken, rarely seen outside ceremonial processions, and yet somehow manages to outlive nearly every other woman in her cohort. She doesn't rule the way Safi did. There's no overt power grab, no letters to European monarchs, but her restraint is strategic. She studies Safi's playbook and chooses a different script. Where Safi commanded, Handan listens. Where others punished, she adapts. When her son Ahmed begins showing signs of melancholy and religious fervor, more prayer than play, she doesn't try to change him, she builds her world around it. You begin to notice that the real shift in power isn't in titles anymore, it's in influence, in whose advice gets heard, in which eunuchs are promoted, and how many scribes a woman can afford to sponsor. Historians like to pretend that the harem was about beauty and birth, but you're watching it function more like an MBA program for soft power. These women aren't trying to seduce sultans, they're trying to survive them, and the sultan, Mehmed, grows quieter. His health falters, his moods fluctuate. He trusts no one. He stops visiting the harem altogether except for official holidays. Rumors swirl that he talks to shadows, consults oracles, and fears mirrors. Whether that's true or just whispered fiction, it doesn't matter. In the palace, perception is more real than fact, and the perception is this: the court is ruled by ghosts, not just of dead brothers and ambitious mothers, but of expectation, of legacy, of a system that no longer fits the people trapped inside it. One fringe fact emerges. In this era, some say a concubine created an unofficial harem journal, a kind of secret newsletter passed between the women, updating each other on promotions, shifts in favor, coded warnings about changing alliances. The empire's first internal gossip magazine. No copies survive, of course, but a Venetian ambassador mentions it in a letter, calling it a curious form of female communication, subversive in its subtlety. You believe it existed, it would explain a lot. Meanwhile, outside the palace, the world keeps turning. The provinces grow restless, the janissaries grumble louder. The treasury strains under the weight of too many wars and not enough victories. But inside the harem, the rhythm remains. Women come and go, some die nameless. Others vanish into arranged marriages in distant cities, bargaining chips dressed in brocade. A few rise, quietly, carefully dot, and then, in 1603, Mehmed III dies. No fanfare, no glory, just a slow, sinking into a reign that never quite began. His son Ahmed ascends the throne, barely a teenager, with more spiritual dread than political ambition. Handan becomes valid sultan, but her power is limited. The janissaries, sensing an opening, begin to assert themselves. The bureaucrats squabble. The empire begins to convulse. But here's what stays the same. The women keep moving, not with ambition, but with awareness. They know now that the game isn't about glory. It's about duration, about leaving behind whispers that last longer than any decree. You pass one concubine teaching another how to sign her name in 3 different alphabets. You hear a lullaby that doubles as a warning about trust. You see the future not in banners or battles, but in how the women of the harem carry themselves, like they're walking through fire barefoot and pretending it's marble. This isn't a golden age. It's not even a silver one. It's tarnished, bronze at best. But it's real. It's raw. It's full of people surviving an empire that's already beginning to forget what it promised them. And yet, they endure. Because they have to. Because they're not here to rule the empire. They're here to outlive it. You blink and suddenly you're standing in a palace where nothing looks broken, but everything feels off. Like an expensive vase turned just slightly the wrong way, still beautiful, but haunted. The marble glows under candlelight. The fountains still babble like trained diplomats, but the energy is thin. That's how it is under Sultan Ahmed I, Roxolana's great-great-grandson, and the first Ottoman Sultan to ascend the throne without executing his brothers. This is a detail you'd think might bring celebration. Instead, it brings tension, because what he spares in blood, he inherits in instability. Ahmed I is young, barely 14 when he takes the throne, and it shows. He prays more than he speaks, fasts more than he feasts, and walks the halls like a student afraid to ask where the bathroom is. But there's an odd power in his piety. It's sincere, almost luminous, and the court doesn't quite know what to do with it. He's not a playboy like his father, not a mystic like his grandfather. He's something new, a boy trying to be a saint in a palace built for sinners, and it makes everyone uncomfortable. Handan Sultan, his mother, steps in as valid, but unlike Safi or Roxolana, she doesn't wield her power like a saber. She holds it like a candle in a drafty room. She's cautious, more mother than manipulator. She wants stability, not glory, and that makes her unfortunately forgettable. Because if there's one thing this palace devours faster than weak princes, it's careful women. Enter Kazem. She arrives quietly, a gift from the Bosnian provinces, barely in her teens. She's not the most beautiful girl in the harem, not the most talented, but there's something about her, the way she listens, the way she pauses before answering a question, the way she already knows which eunuch needs to be thanked and which needs to be feared. You can feel it. She's not here to fall in love. She's here to build something that will last. It doesn't take long. Kazem catches Ahmed's attention within months, not with flirtation, but with silence. She doesn't beg. She doesn't pout. She just exists in a way that makes him calmer. Historians say they genuinely loved each other, and you believe it. Not the fairy tale kind, the quiet kind, the kind built in hallways over whispered prayers and shared melancholy. Ahmed, wrapped in his idealism and spiritual longing, finds in her not just comfort, but clarity. She gives him sons, many, and with each birth, her status grows. But unlike the women before her, Kazem doesn't rush. She doesn't demand titles. She doesn't decorate months with her name yet. She waits, watches, learns, while the court battles internal faction wars, while the janissaries mumble about pay, while the provinces fidget under rising taxes. She invests in something no one else is thinking about. Legacy. You catch her in a hallway once, watching her son play with a wooden sword. Her expression is not maternal. It's calculating, not cold, not cruel, just aware. She's thinking 10 years ahead, maybe 20. She's already choosing his tutors, noting which guards are loyal, which scribes can be trusted. And when she walks away, the silence she leaves behind feels architectural, like she just added a room to the palace and no one noticed. Meanwhile, Ahmed's reign is a strange blend of beauty and chaos. He builds the Blue Mosque, one of the most stunning architectural feats in Islamic history, and insists it be funded from the state treasury, not war spoils. This enrages the religious scholars, who feel it's an indulgence, but Ahmed persists. He sees it not as a monument to power, but as a prayer made of stone, and that's the paradox of his rule. Deeply spiritual, deeply impractical, the janissaries grow restless, military defeats mount, diplomats whisper about the empire's lack of leadership, and through it all, Kazem says almost nothing. She just continues building her network. One fringe detail you pick up: she begins quietly purchasing properties throughout Istanbul. Not grand palaces, but modest homes, bakeries, inns, under other names. No one knows exactly why. Maybe it's security, maybe it's escape, or maybe she's practicing empire on a smaller scale. Then Ahmed dies. At just 27, illness, exhaustion. Divine timing, no one's really sure. And suddenly, The game resets, but this time, there's a twist. Qasim's sons are too young to rule, so the court panics for the first time in decades. A question is posed without a clear answer. Who sits on the throne when the air is still? Playing with marbles, they reach for the past. They choose Ahmed's brother Mustafa, once spared execution, now called forth from obscurity. His reign is complicated. Reports suggest he's unstable, possibly mentally ill. He talks to animals. He forgets names, but he's alive. And in the Ottoman system, that's enough. Qasim watches from the sidelines. She doesn't protest. She doesn't scheme. She observes. She lets the old guard play out their plan. And when Mustafa's reign collapses in less than a year, when the viziers scramble again, she's ready. Her son, Murad IV, is crowned, still a boy, still moldable. And just like that, she steps into her new role, valid sultan. But this time, it's different. There's no Roxolana-style romance, no Safi-style diplomacy. Qasim rules through regency. She is, in effect, the sultan. She meets with ambassadors, signs documents, punishes rebellion, all in her son's name. And she does it with a calm so unnerving it's almost spiritual. The court adjusts, the empire breathes, and the women in the harem, they take notes, because they've just seen something impossible. A concubine became queen, a queen became ghost, and now a ghost has become the government. The palace has learned how to pretend. It pretends that the sultan rules. It pretends that order flows from the divan like water from the marble fountains. It pretends that the prayers echoing from the mosques are stronger than the whispers that pass under the domes. But you, having haunted these halls long enough, know better. The real decisions don't happen in front of the ceremonial mirrors. They happen in the shadows of the valid sultan's chambers. And right now, those chambers belong entirely to Qasim's sultan. Her son Murad IV may wear the sword, may march through the gates with armor and religious poetry stitched into his banner, but the empire, as it exists in function, bends to her breath. You watch her move through the palace like she owns it, because in every meaningful way, she does. Qasim has grown into her power with terrifying grace. She's not loud. She's not flashy. She wears black more often now, like she's in mourning for the era that birthed her. But the message is clear. She doesn't need your approval. She needs your obedience. The janissaries paid and managed. The viziers shuffle like a deck of cards until only the pliable ones remain. The concubines, still here, still trained, but with none of the illusions they once held. They serve the system, not their fantasies, and the system is Qasim's. Murad begins his reign as a child under her regency, but unlike previous boy sultans, Murad does not stay passive. He watches her, learns from her, absorbs not just power, but the posture of power, how to stand in a room and command fear with stillness. When he comes of age and officially takes the reins, there is no rebellion, no sudden pushback against his mother's grip. Instead, there is synergy for a while, until Murad's own traumas and ambition sharpen into cruelty. He doesn't like disorder, doesn't tolerate rebellion. His response to corruption is not bureaucratic, it's theatrical. Executions in public, beheadings without warning, alcohol, tobacco, even coffee banned under threat of death. Historians call him severe, some call him tyrannical, but others say this was the natural result of being raised in a palace where everyone lies and no one is safe. You watch him patrol the streets of Istanbul in disguise, hunting for lawbreakers like a paranoid prince from a folktale. And you wonder, did Qasim see this coming? Because now, even she has to tread carefully. Her son is no longer a boy. He's a man with the entire military machine behind him. And while he respects her, he no longer answers to her. He starts undoing some of her appointments, purging her allies, dismissing her messengers, not out of hate, but out of that cold, calculated logic that the Ottoman dynasty has come to perfect. Survival means isolation. Trust no one, not even your mother. And Qasim adapts. She steps back, plays the long game. Again, she's seen this before. Sultans rise, sultans fall. What matters is the seed you plant for the next reign. So she begins focusing on her grandsons, prepares the next generation, begins drafting a plan not just for the current regime, but for what comes after Murad, because something in her knows his rule is a flame burning too hot to last. And she's right. Murad dies young in 1640, only 27 years old, the same age Ahmed was when he died, The palace mourns him, publicly, but privately, it exhales. The brutality of his rule left the court scorched. And now, power returns to Kazem, because the next sultan, Ibrahim, Murad's brother, is unstable, fragile, possibly delusional. They call him Ibrahim the Mad not in jest, but as a desperate explanation for behavior that baffles everyone. He has obsessions, fish, sense, women with unusually large hips. He's erratic, paranoid, easily manipulated, and the court, it needs someone to keep the empire from becoming a sitcom. That someone is, once again, Kazem. She returns to full power, not through force, but necessity. Everyone from the janissaries to the bureaucrats to foreign ambassadors knows that if Kazem isn't running the empire, no one is. She tries. She really does. She shields him from public disgrace, manages policy behind the scenes, controls appointments, finances, correspondence. She's a government with a hijab, but Ibrahim grows harder to contain. His paranoia deepens. He accuses advisors of plotting with cats. He orders mass executions based on dreams. And eventually, even the people who once feared another civil war agree he has to go. So they do the unthinkable. They depose him. And then, after much hesitation, they kill him, a sitting sultan, strangled by palace guards in 1648. And once again, the crown flows free and into the void. Kazem places her grandson, Mehmed IV, another boy, another regency, another game board. But this time, there's a twist, because Mehmed's mother, Turan Sultan, has arrived, young, ambitious, patient, and she has plans of her own. You see it immediately, the rivalry. Turan respects Kazem, but she doesn't intend to remain in her shadow forever. And Kazem, she sees in Turan the very thing she once was: sharp, adaptable, unafraid. They begin to circle each other like swans that know they will one day strike. Kazem tries to keep power, assigns loyal eunuchs, writes letters directly to the provinces, tries to keep the boy sultan in her quarters, not his mother's, but Turan waits, builds alliances, befriends the JANISSA or IES. And in 1651, it happens. A coup, a quiet one. Kazem is strangled in her own chambers by palace guards. Some say Turan ordered it. Others say it was the janissaries, tired of choosing between the queens. The truth? Probably both. The result? The first woman to run the empire twice dies not in battle, not in exile, but in the very bedchamber. She once conquered. And the women of the harem, they keep moving, because they have seen the blueprint. They have seen the rise and fall, and they know now, more than ever, that to hold power here is to hold fire in your hands. The palace is quieter now, but not in the peaceful sense. It's the quiet of aftermath, of something immense having passed through and left everything just slightly askew. The rugs are still brushed, the fountains still burble, but you know, everyone knows, Kazem is gone, and with her, an era that should never have existed in the first place and age, when women ruled from behind silk screens and shadowed alcoves, where the empire bent not to swords, but to lullabies whispered with lethal precision. The harem outlasted 3 sultans for wars, countless coups, and now it's suddenly ordinary again. Or so it pretends. Turan Sultan steps into the role of valid sultan, and though she arrives by blood and force, she walks carefully, like someone still dusting ash from their hem. She's young, too young, say the elders, but they forget youth in the palace doesn't mean ignorance. It means faster reflexes. Turan has already outmaneuvered Kazem, already survived the labyrinth of the imperial harem, and now she inherits the same impossible equation: rule without ruling, influence without appearing to touch power. But she doesn't blink. She simply inhales, adjusts her veil, and begins. Mehmed IV, her son, is barely a teenager, which means Turan governs, officially through the viziers, unofficially through everyone else. She streamlines court appointments, reinstates fiscal discipline, sponsors scholars, funds shipbuilding. She takes a crumbling empire and, against all odds, shores it up, not because she's a genius, but because she's determined, because she watched Kazem choke on her own web of influence, and she's learned to braid hers tighter. The palace stabilizes, for a while, but the world outside doesn't pause. The Ottomans are losing their grip on Europe. The wars against Austria, Venice, Russia, they're stretching the empire like old parchment. And Turan knows the golden age is over. This isn't the time of Süleiman. This is damage control. She doesn't build monuments. She doesn't host festivals. She consolidates, preserves, quietly restores the balance Kazem upset in her final years. You hear whispers, of course, that Turin regrets the blood she spilled, that she sees Kazem in dreams, sometimes angry, sometimes silent, that she keeps a single ring from Kazem's estate locked in her private chest, unopened. No one knows if it's true, but it feels true, and that's enough. What makes Turin different is that she ends the cycle. She doesn't push for her grandson. She doesn't plot for another regency. When Mehmed IV comes of age and begins to rule in earnest, she steps back, slowly, deliberately. She fades from council meetings, transfers authority, and one day, she simply doesn't speak. She becomes what Roxolana never could be, what Safi never wanted, what Kazem died before discovering a valid sultan who chooses to relinquish power before it's torn from her dot. She dies in 1683, not by force, not in scandal, not in exile, in peace. The last great architect of harem politics, slipping quietly from a system she once redefined. Her legacy, not conquest, not monuments, stability, a rare thing, rare still when held by women who were never meant to rule. After her, the harem softens, not disappears, never that. It remains part of the empire's machinery, but the fire dims. The dynastic battles of women behind the throne fade into legend, into stories whispered by eunuchs to new concubines who don't fully believe them. The palace, sensing the shift, returns to male-centered rituals. But something has changed permanently. The memory of women's rule lingers like incense soaked into stone. You see it in the silence of the rooms they once walked, in the way attendants still glance at the doors, half expecting a shadow to pass, in the way even sultans pause before sitting on a throne once whispered into power by a woman's breath. The empire doesn't erase them. It can't. It just stops speaking their names, officially. But the records remain. The buildings they funded, the schools they built, the sons they shaped into sultans, and the states they held together through sheer force of patience. And you, standing in the middle of it all, feel the echo. Roxolana, with her letters and poison rumors. Nurbanu, threading Venice and Istanbul together with a smile. Safi, balancing Europe in her ink-stained fingers. Kazem, the mother of empire and martyr of ambition. Turhan, the last woman standing, who finally found the door out. This wasn't a love triangle. It was a dynasty built on the bones of affection, betrayal, and the soft, dangerous power of motherhood. These women didn't just survive the harem. They hijacked it, rewired it, used it not to seduce sultans, but to manufacture them. And now, the palace quiets, the curtains still sway, the scent of rosewater lingers. But the story's over. At least this chapter. The rest, the fragments, the gossip, the unfinished letters tucked in golden drawers, those are for another night. You can feel the palace dim now. The oil lamps flicker, but the edges are soft, no longer sharp with ceremony. You're not watching history anymore, you're walking through its ruins, barefoot, careful, calm. The noise is gone. The echoes have settled. There are no more coronations. Tonight, no betrayals, no whispers tucked behind latticework, just the gentle hush of marble remembering footsteps. The ghosts you met, Roxolana, Nurbanu, Safi, Kazem, Turin, they faded back into the folds of velvet and parchment, where they belong, not forgotten, just resting. And you've done enough for one night. You've traveled centuries without moving, watched empires rise through cradle songs and fall through second-hand silk. You've seen that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it hums, sometimes it waits, sometimes it kisses a child goodnight and signs a death warrant with the same hand. The harem isn't just a room, it's a legacy stitched by women who knew how to outlive love, grief, and history itself. So now, let your thoughts drift like incense. Let the voices recede. Let the weight of the stories sink into the pillows. There are no more titles to remember, no more names to decode, just quiet, and breath, and sleep, and a script, sweet dreams.